Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are finishing the original Matrix trilogy by talking about The Matrix Revolutions from 2003. This movie, back in the day, came out just a little like 6 months after the Matrix Reloaded. So we thought it would be proper to do them very contained on the podcast too. So we did Reloaded last week. We're doing Revolutions this week, closing out the Matrix trilogy. We might have a little more Matrix stuff for you before the end of the year because we want to talk about the Animatrix and some of those crazy-ass video games they made. But today we will be finishing the original story of The Matrix as it existed on screen, and I'm excited because I've always liked The Matrix Revolutions, but after having our two conversations on the show, Sean, about the original and then especially Reloaded, I had a different perspective on Revolutions this time, and I think I respect it more than I have before even. And I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. I think it's got a couple of kind of messy pieces to it, but overall, I think it is. I know this is not the general opinion on these movies, but I definitely think that this is better than the second movie.
It is. It definitely is. Yeah.
And it's got a real energy to it that I think the second movie lacked. And I think it has some really interesting like ways of sort of like contextualizing and analyzing sort of like Judeo-Christian themes and stuff like that in a way that most Hollywood movies are like historically fucking awful at. And it's nice to watch a movie that's like engaged with Christ imagery and messianism and that kind of stuff in a way that lots of Hollywood media typically isn't. And I enjoyed that a lot watching the movie as well.
It is amazing to get to the end, and there is, very not subtle Christ imagery and, like, the cross and all of this stuff, and even the idea of light inside the body, and it feels like they've done the work to, like, earn that image.
Yes.
I don't know how many other Hollywood movies I can point to that aren't, like, about Jesus, like, literally, like The Last Temptation of Christ or something, that actually earn images like that. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, that is exactly how I felt if I got to the end of the movie. I'm like, okay, yes, they did their Christ thing with Neo, and they fucking actually earned it. This is not a Man of Steel thing of where it's just like, let's just throw a scene in a church here or there, let's have him be in a cross pose over here, and let's just say there's like a Christ metaphor going on. The Matrix Revolutions is actually like deeply engaged with the idea of Christ and what that means and our relationship to God in like a metaphysical, spiritual way. So
yes,
yeah,
so
cool movie.
Cool movie. Very excited to talk about that. No news today. I didn't really see any news sort of in our ballpark worth talking about, but I have a little bit of stuff. Do you have any stuff, Sean?
I've got some stuff.
Nice. Well, go ahead.
Okay, you want me to go first?
Yeah.
So I'll do a quick update on Persona 5 Royal because I'm continuing. That is. It has its death grip on all of my free time, basically, as is appropriate for a Persona game, because I'm deep into, like, the summer section of that game where everything, that's the point where, like, the vast bulk of the social links and stuff opens up to you. So I am, like, full in on the, like, schedule management porn like efficiency kind of quality of the game of where it's just about like, okay, I gotta hit this person and do this night, and like it's like, oh, I'm gonna reload that save from 2 days ago because now I realized if I had got my guts up there and did this and that and that and the other thing, actually I would have been able to get 5 social links up in the span of days instead of just the 3 that I did in the original. I'm doing all that, and it's fun like mixing in all the things that Persona 5 Royal puts in that's new, because there are some things they do that, like, there's a darts minigame and a billiards minigame that you can play that increases some of your sort of combat effectiveness in a way that's fun, and it gives you kind of an additional thing to do. There are some like story events that don't get you a lot of like practical stuff, but they're just very cool to see with the twins, the Velvet Room attendants in the game. They're very reminiscent of the Elizabeth scenes that they added for Persona 3 Fest, where you kind of go to some of the mundane everyday locations with the two like weird Velvet Room attendant twins, and they just comment on the absurdity of like human life and stuff like that. And yeah, Persona 5 Royal continues to be fucking fantastic. I'm still obviously not towards the end point of the game where the bulk of the new stuff is, but all the new stuff that is there is like subtle, but it does, I think, like continuously enhance the experience. I think the pacing of the game is still stronger than it was in the original. They have added in a full-blown social link for Akachi, the detective character, who had a social link in the base game, but it was just an entirely story-motivated one, where you just, like, as the story progressed, you'd hit different little conversations with him, and his social link would bump up. Those little story scenes still exist, but they're not connected to his social link. You have to go and, like, actively hang out with him.
That's a good choice. That's cool.
Yeah. I think that that's probably the strongest choice in the game of the stuff I've seen so far. That obviously I know that that is setting up that I know that they expand on stuff with that character in all the new stuff they add near the end of the game. But is definitely one of the bigger points of weakness in the first game was that, like, Akachi is a very interesting character that you don't spend enough time with. So when they do a lot of the big story stuff with him near the end, it doesn't all, I think, land as effectively as it could.
And it makes the twists around that character more predictable. Because he's the one who they haven't fully integrated into the game, but they almost fully integrated. It's weird, yeah.
Yeah, like he's being treated differently than the other characters in the way that makes you look out for, okay, what are they going to do with this character? Whereas, like, I imagine, other than the fact that, like, his social links, to go see him, you have to go to the area that is brand new to the game, that I feel like you can kind of tell, if you're someone who didn't play the original, that, oh, this is, like, the new Tokyo zone that you can go to, that all, like, the darts and billiards and all that is. Other than the fact that that's where his character is in the world, I don't think there's anything about his social link to me that feels like it feels like a thing that they added on after the fact. Like, I would assume that most people new to the game would just think, oh, this must be how his social link always worked, or he didn't have a social link originally, because it is so natural and it feels like such a, like, it feels like something that probably they wanted to do for the original game, and just, like, for time reasons and stuff like that had to cut out, because it is a huge fucking game and there's a lot of shit in it. So, like, at some point, you know, to ship anything like this, that was probably something that I'm going to guess ended up on a cutting room floor. And it just does, I think, make that whole side of the game so far a lot richer. And it's true of, like, all the stuff in Persona 5 Royal, is it just makes, like, the whole experience feel even more polished, more well-rounded, more considered. It feels like every change they've made is, like, very clearly for the better. And yeah, it's just an awesome game, and I'm continuing to spend every waking second basically playing it. So
sounds good to me. And I wanted you to go first, Sean, because you were going to give the people what they wanted, which was Persona talk. So
yes, and especially that one person again, Thomas. I'm doing this for you.
Thomas is, as we are recording this, just arriving in Seattle, where he is moving. He did some school up there, and he's moving there for work. Basically, he's a composer, and moving out there for industry stuff. And he and my mom she was driving out with him to help him move. And I think they're still on the road. I think while we're recording this, he will probably arrive in Seattle. So that's my update on Occasional Thomas. So we can all wish him luck in his new life in the Windy City.
Yeah, that's awesome. Has he said anything about me playing Persona 5? Does he know that
yes.
I'm on the Royal train? Okay,
yeah, he's made fun of me for it. Yeah.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that he's holding up his side of the deal.
Okay, this is a two-pronged approach.
Yes, yeah, it's a pincer attack. It's a classic military strategy.
I mean, the more effective thing would be for you guys to just start doing some of my work for me to give me time to play Persona. But sure, that's fine too. Shame.
You know, I've given you some grade A fucking jokes on Twitter for your PowerPoint, so I am doing your work for you.
You really are. Should I talk about that? Should I talk about
yeah,
the last couple of weeks? I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast. We've had 3. So my film club. We just finished the unit that I called Robo Camp. And I refigured it a little bit on the fly, but it wound up being the last 3 weeks of it were all tokusatsu stuff. So it was King Kong Escapes, and then it was Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the original. And then this week was the week I had been most excited for all semester, which was we showed the 1978 Supaidaman, Japanese Toei Spider-Man movie. And then I showed Gokaiger Goseiger Super Sentai 199 Hero Great Decisive Battle, the 2011 35th anniversary Super Sentai film. And Sean, it was this great fucking, like, arc of, like, King Kong Escapes. They were so surprised at how much they loved it, and they really did. They thought it was awesome. I think one of the things I learned in these couple weeks, Sean, is that I think a lot of people assume that younger people, having grown up on all, like, CGI movie effects, that's all they want. and it's not true. I think a lot of younger people see like actual physical like sets and costumes. They see like the little fucking toy ship in King Kong Escapes being pulled along by a string, and they're like, "This is awesome that you can touch it. It's so cool." And so I think they loved all of that. But they liked King Kong Escapes, which we had to watch dubbed because it's hard to find the Japanese version of that. And then we watched Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which we have that beautiful Criterion set of, so that was great. And then this week was Spider-Man and Gokaiger, Goseiger, Super Sentai 1 and N, and Hero Great Decisive Battle, which I am contractually obligated to say in full every time.
Yep.
And they were all so much fun. They loved Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. That movie is wild. I think I did a good intro to that one, which you pitched some... This was very funny. This was like... I showed some of the punchlines I had for this joke, and then you pitched a few, and I wound up combining them. And then we did the same thing this week, because I was introducing Sentai and Spider-Man, and I think my intro for these last couple weeks, I was really proud of how they turned out, because it was fun to introduce a lot of this history. For, like, Godzilla, I showed a clip from the original Godzilla to try to, like, tell them, like, hey, the original Godzilla is a serious movie. I showed probably the clip you would expect me to show, Sean, which is after Godzilla's stomped through Tokyo, he, like... a borderline Italian neo-realist scene of everyone in the hospital just broken.
Yeah.
And that was like, and then everyone was like, oh shit, I didn't know. I think there were a lot of people who didn't know Godzilla got his start that way. And then I don't even remember what silly Godzilla clip I showed after that to like make it fun. Because I did show a scene from King Kong versus Godzilla the week before to introduce the King Kong side of things. I showed some funny Godzilla clip here.
Did you show the clip of Godzilla flying from Godzilla versus the Smog Monster? Because that's the one I would pick, because I think that is the funniest thing that has ever happened in Godzilla.
I don't think I did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I did definitely introduce, I told them about the 1998 American movie. That's where you helped me do some punchlines, because basically I was going to do a joke of like, you know, America did the first punchline I wrote was America tried this and immediately tripped over its own dick. And then I was like, I probably shouldn't say that in a classroom setting. And so I came up with other headlines. You helped me come up with some. Yours definitely got the biggest laugh, which was if you listen at night, you can still hear the screams. And then I showed the clip from Godzilla Final Wars of Godzilla destroying Zilla at the Sydney Opera House.
Yes.
That got a big laugh. Also because I'd forgotten, that scene is bookended by one of the crazy Matrix dudes from Final Wars, like summoning Zilla, and then when Zilla is defeated going, no, and like throwing a temper tantrum. It's fucking great. Totally out of context.
I mean, even in context, it's still like, it's somehow out of context. Basically, that is like what Godzilla Final Wars is.
Yes, exactly. And then, so we covered all of that. Watched Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. That was fun. This week, you know, I had to... It was... The way I arced it, I think, was good. I introduced Super Sentai. Then I talked about Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is actually a crucial show in the history of Super Sentai, because it's actually the third Sentai show, basically. They make two at the beginning, with the original manga artist Ishinomori, who, like, creates it. Then Toei gets the rights. They put Sentai on the back burner for 1 year to do this Spider-Man thing because they have a deal with Marvel. And basically, everything that was in that Spider-Man show was planned for a separate, like, Sentai kind of thing, and they just put Spider-Man in it. But that is the show, because of Leo Pardon, Spider-Man's big mech. That's the first mech in this kind of Sentai show, and then they just start doing that every year. And so it's very important to the history. And then I introduced Power Rangers at the end, and I did make fun of the 2017 Power Rangers movie, which is terrible. You gave me a good Krispy Kreme joke, which then I found a reel online of every time they say Krispy Kreme in the Power Rangers movie. It is 60 seconds long. And I showed that, and that was very funny.
Yeah, because I haven't even seen that movie. The Krispy Kreme thing is like literally the only thing I know about that movie, because I remembered seeing a YouTube video. It might be that YouTube video that you showed of everyone saying Krispy Kreme, and that somehow I had like stumbled onto that, and that is etched in my memory of how hilarious the idea of this Power Ranger movie that just like is basically a giant 2-hour ad for fucking Krispy Kreme donuts is fucking. I think that's the funniest shit in the world.
It is so funny. Because I watched that movie, Sean. I fucking watched it in full because I was thinking if it's good, it would be fun to have an American adaptation of one of these in the class. Nope, it's not good. And it did not. And then I found Super Sentai 199 Hero Great Decisive Battle, and that one is fucking great. And because that's the one, it's the Gokaigers are the pirate Sentai, and the Goseigers are the angel Sentai, who like literally have fucking angel wings when they transform, and it is the funniest shit. I mean, the Gokaigers literally fly around in like a Fisher-Price pirate ship. It's so good. People loved it. They loved both of them. Both Spider-Man and Super Sentai got spontaneous rounds of applause at the end of the movie, which is the first time we've had that all semester.
You got a good group of kids there. They know what's up. Like those are the movies you need to applaud for. Like, you know,
yes.
like that's the shit that deserves the standing ovation at the end.
Well, I think everyone agreed, you know, because I said this, they were kind of trying to sum up why it was so fun, and I think the words I put to it were, like, Super Sentai feels like the stories you and your friends would come up with on the playground, and then just done with, like, really, like, 'cause, like, legitimately really good fight choreography. The fight choreography in Sentai generally is great, but in that movie in particular, it's, like, really good. And then they're playing, and someone noted this, like, everything they're using are just the toys. Like, they don't look like the nice prop versions of the toys. They're just the fun toys. So that adds to that feeling of you playing with your friends. And it just, you know, like, that Sentai movie, it is transparently a movie for kids. And we're all, you know, 18 to 29, I guess. I'm 29. And we're having so much fun with it. It's just, it makes you into a kid watching it. And then Spider-Man just blew their fucking minds every 2 minutes because he would get on a wall. And if you haven't seen 70s Spider-Man, the best thing in that is every time he jumps up on a wall, he, like, moves around, like, twice like a spider or like a bug would on a wall. And it just eats up, like, so much time, and it's great.
Yeah, and him just talking about sending people to hell and shit. It's fucking,
The biggest laugh by far was the fan subs I found did have all the songs subtitled. And the closing song of 70s Spider-Man is like, his father sleeps under a tomb of dirt. his destiny is death. And then, like, there's this line from the narrator at the end of the movie where he says, Spider-Man will not rest until he is dead or the Iron Cross army lays in ruins. And people laughed so hard at that. It was so great.
Yeah, there's like there's a weird intensity to it that you really are not expecting. Yeah, with Super Sentai Spider-Man.
Oh man, so that's been really fun, Sean, and that's the end of all the Japanese stuff we're watching, because these last 4 weeks are focusing more on Western stuff, not all American, because we're watching Metropolis. But yeah, so all the fun stuff's done, and now I'm kidding. There's fun stuff to come still. But
I do love that, like, because at what point are you watching Metropolis?
Next week.
Okay, good, because I love the like polar opposite spectrums of here's Power Rangers, and here's a silent movie that is, like, you know, one of the most influential movies ever about, like, science fiction stuff, but is a, like, very old German silent film. So, you know.
Although I am showing the 1980s version that Giorgio Moroder made, that is, like, sped up and has all the, like, Freddie Mercury music and Pat Benatar and all this stuff. And it is a fucking trip. And I did that very intentionally because I had in one hand the, like, nice restored, you know, organ score 150-minute version of Metropolis, or 80-minute Giorgio Moroder fucking nutso version, and one of those fit in this class better than the other.
Yeah, okay, that's a slightly smoother transition than just, like, and now it's movie time, boys. I'm like, let's all sit down and like, let's appreciate history, because I do love that original Metropolis movie, but that would be a very weird back-to-back kind of you know, anyone would get whiplash watching those two movies in close proximity.
Maybe I could just rescore the full 150-minute version with, like, every Super Sentai theme song from over the years.
There you go. Yeah, and then you got to throw in the song from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla when he fights Anguirus, because it's the best song in any movie ever.
That's so good. The fucking, man, the King Caesar song, sitting in a fucking auditorium while they're doing the King Caesar song, and you feel the length of it.
Yeah. That moment when it, like, goes through the chorus and then it goes on to the second verse, and you're like, oh, we're going to be here for, like, the full 4 minutes. This isn't some, like, 90-second cut of the song, where this is, like, the full studio track we are in for.
The best part is they only have so much to cut to, so they have to do, like, multiple rounds of reaction shots from all the characters waiting for King Caesar to wake up. And at a certain point, they all look like, is she done? Like, is she done? It's so funny. I love that movie, Sean.
Yeah.
It's so good, man. Yeah. So anyway, I think this Giant Robots class has been a rousing success. It's been quite fun.
It seems very awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. I did see another movie this week, though, that was the opposite. I did go see... I saw Marvel's Eternals. Oh, God. That movie.
Yeah, I saw your Twitter thread on that one. I have not seen Marvel's The Eternals.
Don't. At least don't waste your fucking time in a theater. Like, that one will, if you need to be a completionist, like, wait for it on Disney Plus so you can, like, binge watch it in 30-minute chunks over, like, a week, because it is... Sean, I don't know if I've ever sat through a movie in a theater, like a commercial multiplex movie theater, that felt longer than Eternals. Because Eternals is 2.5 hours, which is already, like, very long. And I mean 2.5 hours, like, sans credits. It's 2.5 hours and 10 minutes of credits. It's really long. It's the second longest movie Marvel's made after Endgame. But it feels somehow even longer than it actually is, because it is so shapeless. The whole first hour of the movie is just like backstory and flashbacks and lore, while with this like very, very thin thread of some of the Eternals meeting up because maybe there's deviants out there again, but like there's no real propulsion to it. And then even once it does reveal the plot, there doesn't start being propulsion to it. It is so shapeless. I had a moment of true despair in this movie, Sean, where there's this point midway through the movie where you get the biggest lore dump where they really tell you what's going on in the story. And I thought, okay, well, we're about 2 hours in, and now we're going to start wrapping this up because we know the plot. It took way too long, but now they're going to go fight the big bad. And then I checked my phone, and it had been 58 minutes. I was sure. Sean, you would have put me before God himself with a lightning bolt in his hand, ready to smite me were I wrong, and I would have sworn we were 2 hours into this movie. We were not. We were one, and I got up and went to the lobby and bought some M&Ms because I'm like, I'm not going to stay awake without fucking sugar throughout the next 90 minutes of this fucking movie. It is terrible. It is bad. It is like... And I've never felt that strongly about a Marvel thing. I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier was pretty bad, but has some good things in it. But, like, my God, even the worst Marvel movies have fun things in them. There's nothing in Eternals. It is... Every time they try to make their, like, quippy Marvel jokes, it is a cry for help. The movie doesn't understand humor and can't do it. The acting is, like, so bland. The only actor who kind of rises out of the mire is Kumail Nanjiani, basically because he is Kumail Nanjiani, and they've suppressed everyone's personality, and a suppressed Kumail Nanjiani still has personality, although it is less than he has in anything else I've ever seen him in. Mm-hmm. It is a dull piece of shit. God, like, this is one where I walk out, I'm like, if Marvel could just give us another couple of years off, that'd be great. This is bad.
I feel like filmmakers should have to have, like, the general audience have to like fill out a survey or something, or like they have to like sign a contract to be like, you are allowed to make a movie that is longer than 2 hours. It's just like it just shouldn't be done unless you've got a really good reason to, because that was just like a thing I felt like watching The Matrix Revolutions and Reloaded. Both of those are like pretty lead 2 hour movies. It's like, this is a good length for a movie. 90 minutes to 2 hours is all that most movies need, and most movies that go over it, it's a fucking mistake. It's obviously there are some movies that are very long, like a Lawrence of Arabia or the Lord of the Rings stuff, that can be very good, but most movies that go for that big bloated 2.5 hour length, it's just no. Stop.
I mean,
you gotta cut it out.
That was like more than any, because okay, Eternals has obviously had very bad reviews, and it has also had bad audience reception. It got a B cinema score, which is the like polling they do after movies. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know, like, general audiences are very loath to go below like an A- with movies, because general audiences are nice and don't think about movies that way. A B is kind of like an F from a critic. It usually indicates a movie's going to bomb.
Yeah, that's like Batman v Superman got a B. Like,
yeah, I think so.
It's like that kind of like, you know that like the general public is not into this movie if it goes into the B range.
But I didn't need any of that. It was when I saw the movie is 160 minutes long, and it's like I just couldn't fathom what the reason would be for a Marvel like origin story movie like this being that long, and there isn't. This movie has, like, and a lot of people say, oh, but it has a lot of characters and lore. And, like, yeah, but it has no plot. Like, the movie has, like, 40 minutes of plot, max. The plot is, like, super simple. And, like, having a lot of lore is not the same as having a plot. Dune Part 1 taught us that. And Dune Part 1 is way more propulsive than this. So it's just, like, oh, my God. Like, yeah, there are definitely, I love plenty of long movies. There are plenty of long movies that earn their length. in general, Marvel movies are not movies that need to be this fucking long. I mean, for the love of God.
Yeah, because like most like long movies you think of, like Seven Samurai or Lawrence of Arabia, you know, they're hitting that 3 hour mark. It's like, well, that's a fucking big ass movie. Like it needs to have that length. It's like, you know, Akira Kurosawa wasn't turning around and then making Yojimbo be a fucking 3 hour epic.
No,
right? It's
yeah.
like the scope of the movie is scaled to the scope, or like the scope of the running time of the movie is like scaled to the scope of its like narrative ambitions and like content, right? Because, you know, another movie that Marvel made that has a lot of characters that they introduced in that movie is Guardians of the Galaxy, and that is 122 minutes long. It is almost exactly 2 hours with credits. It's like, you don't, just because you have a lot of characters doesn't mean you have to have a giant ass fucking runtime.
No, it doesn't. It absolutely does not. And none of the characters are interesting. Their powers are bad and don't make sense. Like, the most recognizable like power set anyone has is Icarus, played by Richard Madden, who's just Superman. And he's not just Superman, he's Superman from the Zack Snyder movies. Like, it's shocking how much like they had no vision for the character other than cribbing the exact style of Superman that Snyder directed. And I like Snyder's visual direction of Superman, whatever else you think. Like, I think the way he visualizes the powers is cool, but like the knockoff version of that with a character who flies and then they have him fly and do like the eye beams and that's it. But like, that's just such a boring take on it, because also Richard Madden is a much more boring actor than Henry Cavill. It's Angelina Jolie is in this movie. Fucking Angelina Jolie they got for a Marvel movie, and she does nothing in this movie except stand at the edge of the frame and look blankly into space because she has space amnesia. And like, it's shocking. I'm amazed she agreed to do this movie, because they didn't have a part for her. They didn't have a character. They didn't have anything for her to do, but she's there. It's a lot of stuff like that. It is boring as shit. It has... you know this about me, listeners, Sean. I do not like to be the person going, there's plot holes in this movie, because I don't usually give a shit. There are actual plot holes big enough to drive fucking semi-trailers through in Eternals. Their explanation for why they didn't fight Thanos makes so much less sense than if they just hadn't brought it up. Like, if they hadn't brought it up, I would have headcanoned it somehow. The way they bring it up just makes all of the characters awful hypocrites who I want to die. The main villains in the movie are these deviants that are like these weird alien dog monsters. They kind of look like shittier versions of like Zool from Ghostbusters, the fucking dogs running around the city, but they have all these like tendrils and stuff. They look weak. They don't look hard to fight. They look like stuff Iron Man would make a fucking like unmanned drone to go fight. Like, we saw the Avengers fight much stronger threats in 4 different Avengers movies, and then this is like, but these are the things the gods are fighting. There's a couple of good images in it. It does look better than your average Marvel movie, because Chloe Zhao told Kevin Feige what location shooting is. The very funny interview where Kevin Feige admits he didn't know what location shooting. I'm exaggerating, but it was a funny interview. But like, it doesn't really matter if you're not doing anything with it. God, it sucks. There's no humanity to it. There's no emotion to it. And it is so long.
It sounds like this and Dune are the same movie. Like, it just, they sound like the exact same movie to me, without the Thanos stuff.
Dune has so much more personality. I will give it that. Dune has like, because part of this, I mean, there's the whole like Chloe Zhao of it that people have been debating over, and I do think one of the things that's interesting about Eternals is it does feel like someone trying to leave more of a stylistic auteur stamp on a Marvel movie than you usually get. And I think one of the failures of that is she's not like at the same time allowed to leave as much of an ideological stamp, which means I think it's a lot of very empty style, but also that then when you shift into action mode, I mean, if you haven't read about all the behind the scenes, like, Marvel has this like centralized unit in the production house that previses the action for all the different movies. So it's not that like every director comes in and comes up with the action in-house themselves. Something like Shang-Chi, which did do that, is more of the outlier. And that's why a lot of the action in Marvel movies feels very samey. And it's really obvious in Eternals, because the shift from like Chloe Zhao mode to like generic Marvel CGI action mode is really harsh, and you'll have like really nice location shooting where it's a Marvel movie that isn't on a fucking blue screen with bad compositing, and that's nice, and then it is suddenly on a blue screen with bad compositing and bad CGI villains and bad CGI versions of the characters, and it looks shitty, and it doesn't have any aesthetic link to the rest of the movie, and it just, like, that's a really, like, harsh split. And I will give Dune this. Dune doesn't have that problem. Dune has a real stylistic and, like, consistency to it. Dune has a much more propulsive plot, and I know Dune doesn't have a very propulsive plot, but at least it has, like, someone's out to get House Atreides. This movie doesn't have that. Eternals is really bad. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's a really bad movie.
Well, maybe I'll watch it on Disney Plus someday. I mean, I probably would. Like, it is, the 2.5 hours is just, like, it's just brutal. I can't deal with it. I can't deal with a movie that I probably won't like, and having it be 2.5 hours is just, why?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a character named Icarus, so this comparison is logical, but it does feel like Marvel flying a little too close to the sun with that. Like, they've asked audiences to go along with a lot, and mostly audiences have been rewarded with at least fun. But if you're gonna do 2.5 hours and not even make it fun, oh boy, that's a brutal ask for audiences. I would be curious about your thoughts. I mean, it gets into, like, the very Jack Kirby side of Marvel with, like, all of the, like, celestial beings and, like, all of that stuff, but it doesn't make it fun. It makes it so dry, and I don't know a ton about, like, old Jack Kirby comics, but I know people talk about them as, like, psychedelic and weird and fun and crazy. There's none of that here. Like, honestly, this sort of needs, like, the touch like David Lynch's Dune had, which is, like, take all the world building but make it weird and psychedelic, and, like, you feel like you're on drugs a little bit. And Eternals presents it like just dry history, down to the degree where, like, there's one human character in the movie played by Kit Harington, and when he learns his girlfriend is an Eternal, like, she literally says, "Yeah, we're Eternals. We've been around for 7,000 years doing this on Earth, fighting the deviants." And he goes, "Wow, why didn't you fight Thanos?" And that's it. There's no, like, there's Eternals? What does that mean? There's none of that. It's so dry and inhuman. And I think Dune has that problem to a certain extent, too, the Denis Villeneuve Dune, of, like, taking this very, like, out there kind of psychedelic world building and trying to make it very dry and historical. And I think that's the wrong tone, but Eternals has that problem much worse.
Yeah, like, I don't know how, like, if modern Hollywood would be able to do Jack Kirby stuff right. Like, because it does need that kind of, like, psychedelic energy. I would love to, you know, I would love to see a director that, like, given the free reign to actually be able to do it. I think there would be, like, if you could visually capture, like, the life and energy that his art had, like, and, like, I mean energy almost, like, literally in terms of, like, the effects and the way he drew it. Like, there could be a really interesting, like, visual take on that, I think, in live action, but I just don't see Hollywood ever, like, giving a director the leeway to do something like that in the modern system.
Well, and the best images in Eternals are direct lifts from Kirby. It's all the images of the Celestials, the giant, like, beings with the 6 eyes that I've seen. It looks like they're pretty directly ripped from the comics and then made 3D for the movie. And everything they do with those, like, characters who aren't in the movie much, but, like, those beings, I love that stuff visually. But it's the most you get in that direction, and the rest of it is just very dry. So, It's too bad. But there you go. We've reviewed another Marvel movie, kind of. There you go. We've got one more this year, but at least it's Spider-Man, and looks good. Yeah.
It's got Doc Ock in it. It's got Spider-Man in it. It's got Doctor Strange in it. It's got like people in it. You know, like, that was always the thing with Eternals that I was, like, very cautious about is, you know, I don't know much about those characters specifically, because they're the kind of characters that, like, a couple of them I think I've seen, but they've popped up in comic books, like, adjacent to their own. I've never read an Eternals comic or a comic of, like, any of those characters that are their own stories. And it's that thing of where, like, I don't, you know, the movie would have to build all of my affection for the characters unto itself. And it sounds like this is definitely something this movie's not going to do. It doesn't have for me the goodwill that I have going into, like, a Shang-Chi of, like, even I thought Shang-Chi was really well done. Even if it wasn't that well done, I probably still would have liked that movie a fair amount, as long as it did, like, Shang-Chi the character well, because I like Shang-Chi already. So I'm fairly easy to please in that regard. You know, I like Spider-Man already. As long as you don't fuck it up like Amazing Spider-Man 2, like, I'm pretty easy to please. Like, it just needs to be a decent version of Spider-Man, and I'll have a pretty good time. But with Eternals, there's none of that goodwill for me going in. It needs to prove itself entirely on its own. and I don't think it would.
This is the issue also with Eternals, is it strays too far into the DC area, where the whole idea with the Eternals is that they're these beings who inspire myths on Earth. So it's not like the mythical Icarus, but the mythical Icarus on Earth was inspired by this character. And it's not
Which means that dude must have been a real fuck up.
I know.
He's like, if your whole thing is like it's a shorthand for being like too big for your britches and getting fucked up over it, it's like you gotta have been pretty awful.
Yeah. And you have so Angelina Jolie, her character is Thena, and then that becomes Athena in Greek mythology, and that's the whole idea. The thing is, DC in their movies, and DC does this more in their comics to begin with, but DC in their movies recently has been very invested in a lot of this, not literally making them myths from legend, but making them mythical. So the Wonder Woman movie does this, and the Aquaman movie does this, and I think Zack Snyder's Justice League does it really well, of the idea of gods among men. That is an idea the DC movies are they've carved out a space, and whether you like it or not, they've been developing that. And so Eternals, this is the rare case where Marvel is coming in and doing something that another superhero movie is already doing over here, and I think pretty well. And so it really pales in comparison to that, and that feels like a mistake, because I think the movie can't quite decide whether to make these characters characters in their own right, or more archetypal and iconic in the way that Snyder sort of makes the heroes in Justice League. And it's kind of stuck, and that's part of why the characters have no personality.
Yeah, and it's why I've never gotten that invested into that side of things of the Marvel universe in the first place, is because to me, the Marvel style has always been best with more grounded characters that, they have their heightened fantasy reality, but that is always juxtaposed with a very mundane reality, right? And Spider-Man is the best example of that. But the X-Men have that. Fantastic Four has that. Captain America has that. Iron Man has that, right? It's Iron Man both is super genius playboy with his crazy iron suits and everything, and he's also an alcoholic, right? It's that juxtaposition is at the core of what made Marvel remarkable when the brand started with Fantastic Four #1. And it's where the movies have always been successful, is that recapturing some of that energy. And I think it's why people get so invested in the world and the characters, is because the movies have been very good at getting you that feeling of this is something both accessible and also very heightened. And so it doesn't necessarily surprise me that when Marvel tries to do that in the movie realm, it can't quite find it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all my stuff. Anything else before we jump into the Matrix?
I've got one other thing. I bought a ridiculous thing.
Okay, tell us.
I want to talk about. So you all know I love me some Genshin Impact. And I got floated up on my YouTube recommendations the other day an unboxing video from Japan. It's Mayano, who's the voice actor who plays Zhongli. He was drunk and opening. It's a very good video. He's drunk and opening up a box of warehouse wafer cookies from Japan. That you brought back some of those from
yes, I
a
did.
Gundam thing as a souvenir. And if for people who don't know, in Japan there's a brand of cookies. They're basically cookies. They're like wafer snacks. I don't know what we have them over here, but I don't know what's the brand that's iconic over here.
They're two thin wafers with a chocolate or a fruit kind of paste in the middle.
Yes.
And they're very light and sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a long-running brand of sweets in Japan through Bandai Namco. And they're have a whole marketing strategy of where they pair them with some sort of brand like Kimetsu no Yaiba or Jujutsu Kaisen, Gundam, whatever. And they have little collectible stickers or toys or something that comes packed with it. And I saw this video, and there's a Genshin Impact one, and I had this thought of God, those are really cool. And I had this other thought of I'm a fucking adult. I've got a bank account. I've got not a great amount of money, but I've got enough money, and I've shipped enough things from Japan that you can't just buy it off of Amazon, but you can use other services that you can buy things, and then have the service ship it to you internationally. And so I bought a box of 20 Genshin Impact warehouse wafer cookies from Japan that come with a little set of cards. So I've got 20 Genshin Impact cards. They are very fucking cool. I would not recommend normal people don't do this. This is a ridiculous expenditure of money. But it was something that I was like, I want to do this. And they're very good snacks as well. Obviously, I wouldn't normally just buy the Japanese box of snacks just for it unto itself. But the cards are basically, they're like almost like credit card style. They're like plasticky, kind of like if you have like a medical insurance card or something like that, and they have like kind of holographic foil on them. So they're very nice. They're not just little paper cards. And it's basically just a set of characters from up to, I think Zhou or Xiao is the most recent character. And I bought this ridiculous thing, and I spent the last 4 days eating 20 Japanese wafer snacks, and I got some really good cards. I've got a Ganyu.
I see her. She looks good.
Yep. I've got Mona. I like Mona a lot. She's great.
They're kind of holographic, it looks like, too, a little bit.
Yeah, they've got a foil to them. I've got clay, so you can see them.
One.
And they're all the basically, like any kind of metal parts of their costume or anything like that have a shine to them. And the thing that really I found very heartwarming was the last one I opened, I got Chi-Chi, who was, of course, my first 5-star that I got in the game.
That's
awesome. She was the last card I got. And so, yeah, I don't know what I'll do with these or where I'll put them, but I thought I would talk about it on the podcast because I bought this ridiculous thing. And it made me very happy. But it is there. I had an incredibly stupid reaction to after I finished getting all of them and I had them in a stack, I'm like, God, these cards are really fucking cool. And I noticed on the back, they've got numbers. So it says like, and you probably can't see it because it's very small, but it's like number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. There are 34 total cards. There's 20 in a box, so obviously I don't have all of them. But I have not bought any more, and I'm not going to buy any more.
Okay, I thought the next step was like, and I bought 3 more boxes.
Because you would have to buy at least 3 boxes, which would be a ridiculous expenditure of money, especially when you would have to ship. I would have to get the next 2 with a separate shipping cost, obviously. That would be absurd. But I did have this crazy thought in my head of where I was very happy, like, oh, I got 20 cards. I like all the Genshin Impact characters, so there wasn't like, and since this is before Raiden Shogun, there wasn't like this is the one character I really need to have. It's also before Eula, so my 2 favorite characters in the game weren't here. And that's actually like good because I didn't have a need for I need this specific card. But when I put them all in a row and I saw the numbers, I'm like, oh, let me put them in the number stack. And I'm like, well, there's all these numbers on these cards, but I don't have all the numbers. I've got like 1, but I don't have 2 or 3, and I have 4. And it is crazy how that was the thing that tempted me. It wasn't, oh, I really wish I had Beidou, which I would like to have. I didn't get her, but it's not Beidou. I just want all the numbers, and that's just an awful human impulse. And I thought that was very weird.
You know, that kind of sums up a lot of the Genshin Impact experience, but
yes.
Like the Genshin Impact experience, it does seem rewarding on its own, because those are cool little cards. That seems more substantial than some of the other stuff I've seen in those kind of cookies.
Yes. That's the reason I did it, is because mostly they're usually like little stickers and stuff like that, but these are like a really nice set of like nice cards that are like a very nice quality. They look very cool. They're very like satisfying to sort of fiddle with and stuff like that.
Well, I mean,
I
Sean,
don't know where I'll put them, but
yeah, I mean, I can't judge you, Sean, because every day I'm here at my desk, I look at a wall where I have all of the One Piece Wanted poster handbills from every volume of the One Piece magazine, which I get every few months from Japan. It's like they do it 3 times a year, I think, and I get all of these because they are fun to look through. They've got little mangas and books, and there's good reading material if I want to do like practice and stuff. But also, I do mainly do it because they come with a poster in each one, and then I get an increasing wall of all the One Piece Wanted posters, and it makes me feel good. So, you know, I get it, Sean.
Yeah, no, I mean, you do way more like weird random purchases that make no sense to me. This was a rare instance of me, because I'm a pretty cheap bastard in most instances. This was like a rare, like, you know what, fucking, I never spend money on anything other than like video games in like streaming services. Like I'm so cheap. I'm just gonna buy the stupidest thing I can because I want this fucking set of cards. And the wafer snacks are also very good.
Not the stupidest thing you could buy from Japan.
It's true. It is not the stupidest thing, but it is a weird thing to buy. But I like them, and I just have them, and I can just look over, and I can look at Kaya staring over at me, or Amber, or Chi-Chi, and it's just a good time.
Nice. Well, I don't know how to make the transition from that to the Matrix, but you want to go ahead and jack into the Matrix one last time here, Sean?
We've already used that pun. Let's revolve over and talk about the Matrix Revolutions.
But all right. Matrix Revolutions, third film in the Matrix series. We gave our little sort of spoiler-free intro at the top, and now we will talk about the movie in full, but I guess we should start with the same thing we did for the last two movies, which is just memories of seeing this movie and the time around it, because I very vividly remember seeing this movie opening night, like in a full sold-out audience with like a big line outside, which isn't something you see for movies anymore. And I remember the theater we were in and everything very, very vividly. But I also remember that the hype around this one was definitely more muted than for Reloaded. Matrix is something that burned very bright, but kind of burned too bright, because I think people were a little... I mean, there's a reason why they haven't done the like two-parter thing released 6 months apart much since this, because this movie made $427 million worldwide. Matrix Reloaded had made $740 million, so it was quite a drop-off. Still made a healthy profit, but, quite a drop-off. And also, this was November 5th, 2003. This was 1 month out from Return of the King, which was definitely, like, eating a lot of the hype at the time. But I still remember being very hyped for Matrix Revolutions.
I don't know if I would describe my original reaction as being very hyped. I actually don't have a lot of distinct memories of seeing Matrix Revolutions in the theater, other than I definitely did. I remember my original response being mostly kind of bored by the big middle action scene in the middle of the movie in Zion, which I do still have issues with. I like it a lot more now than I did then. But back then I really didn't like it, and I couldn't remember for a long time if I had ever seen the movie in any other context. And it was rewatching the movie that I did remember that I did later rent the movie, I think after I had played The Path of Neo, which came out like 2 years after this. And I was like, oh, I should just watch that movie again, and then rented it. And I'm pretty sure I just skipped through the whole big machine battle at the middle of the movie because I still was not invested in it, because I mostly just wanted to see the ridiculous Dragon Ball fight at the end between Neo and Smith, because that I have always liked that. Like, that is the main thing I remember, is the ending. I had absolutely no recollection of the beginning of this movie at all when I watched it. I did not remember that the Merovingian was at the beginning of this movie. I didn't remember there's a whole gunfight. I didn't remember Neo being in purgatory. I didn't remember any of that shit. My memory of this movie was there's a very, very long action scene with some robots, and then Dragon Ball Z happens, and then in Path of Neo they make that scene even better. Like, that is what I have always remembered of the Matrix Revolutions.
Yes. Interesting, yeah. I mean, obviously, I saw more movies throughout my life and have been more, like, it's just a weird thing about me is I kind of remember where I've seen every movie,
Yeah. Because also, I should say that, like, I mean, when this came out, this is before I was, like, I would describe myself as being into movies, because I didn't, like, watch movies as a serious thing that I really like cared about until probably like high school. Like, before that, movies was just a thing that like you sometimes saw, and other than like some of the stuff I really liked, like Godzilla and King Kong and some of that old stuff that like I didn't know anybody else what that was into. Like, movies that were in the movie theater, I would still enjoy them, but I typically didn't get like obsessive about them or anything like that. I was way more interested in comic books, in books, in video games, and not so much in movies at that point in my life.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was so hyped for everything. I was that kid who like read everything I could get my hands on about movies back in the day, which back in the day often meant magazines and physical things like that. I'm old enough to remember that kind of stuff. But no, Revolution's definitely, I mean, those couple of years, like 2001, 2, and 3, are definitely marked with a lot of formative memories for me, because that's when the Harry Potter movies started coming out, and Lord of the Rings, and we got the Matrix sequels and all of that stuff. And Matrix Revolutions I would have seen in the exact same auditorium that I saw Return of the King a couple months later, or 2 months, the next month, December. And so there's a lot of just like vivid memories there. And I remember always being impressed by the scale of Revolutions, because it is a big, like, it's a big movie with a lot of like moving parts and really impressive scale and effects that like hold up generally a lot better than some of the ambitious stuff in Reloaded, for instance.
Yes,
and,
definitely.
Yeah, and it's just, and it's one where I remember myself being smaller in a theater, looking up at the giant screen and feeling it was larger than life and being very moved by it. And then I'd been kind of up and down on the movie over the years, because this is the prickliest Matrix movie. This is the hardest one in some sense to love, because it is much darker than the other two. It is much gorier, and I think that's a very intentional choice. It has almost no Matrix in it. You're in the Matrix at the beginning a little bit and at the end for the Dragon Ball fight, but the big middle stretch is all real world. Its ideas are big and heady. Like I realized watching it, I'm like, oh, this is kind of what Sean was asking for with Reloaded, is like flipping the script a little bit to like stay in those philosophical questions longer. Because this movie has a lot of action, but it is also like even more of like the talky, like philosophical stuff than Reloaded does. But I do have to say, watching it again last night, what really clicked for me is that this is a really propulsive movie. It's, especially if you cut out the credits, I checked, like, this movie ends at 120 minutes. It is a very tight 2 hours. Every scene sort of has a clear purpose through the movie. You could quibble with a couple of like the little action beats at the beginning, which I think are there for kind of just fun nostalgia almost. But certainly by the time you're like meeting the Merovingian and stuff, we are on a very like clear like move to the end. The movie starts in that train station, setting up like the main sort of, I think, contrast of the movie, which the movie like lays out its thesis. It's this kind of like conflict between love and karma, and some of those big ideas. And then you have the Oracle scene about endings and death, and then the whole movie is exploring that. And I think it's very impressive and moving, and I think it follows through on its ideas very beautifully and powerfully. And man, it's also just striking in our world of endless franchises to watch a movie that is this invested in ending itself. And like, it is very much an ending. It is not a like whatever that next Matrix movie is. It can't be a direct sequel to this, because this is a really firm ending.
Yeah, absolutely. That it is. There is something very refreshing about the like. No, it's just done, man. Like you can't do anything else. Like it's the thing where it's like. There are a lot of franchises from like around this time. I think the one that stands out to me is Pirates of the Caribbean, that like have gone way past their like shelf date. It's just like it kind of keeps going. Harry Potter is the same thing with like the Fantastic Beasts shit, right? It's just like, your time is kind of done. Like it's time to end and move the fuck on. And it is something where obviously they are bringing the Matrix back for the Matrix 4. Which I'm very excited and curious to see what that's going to be. But it feels very appropriate that, like, this movie, after this, it was done, and then you had Path of Neo and The Matrix Online 2 years later. The Matrix Online is, like, an interesting experiment that doesn't go for as, it's not like an eternal MMORPG. It went for a few years and then petered out. And then after that, it's just like nothing. You don't get we've talked about this before, you don't get the big expanded universe stuff. And it feels like because like there is an intentionality to this story that means that like the expanded universe stuff can't happen, because the universe of the Matrix exists to tell this story. It doesn't exist to tell an infinite number of stories. It exists to tell this story of Neo and the One and the Christ-like figure and all that stuff. And then once that's over, it's over. And we can revisit it with the same filmmakers, like 10 plus 15 fucking years later or whatever. But other than that, like, it is what it is. And there's something about that is very nice in our, like, modern, endless, franchise-driven media world, to go back and revisit one that said, yeah, let's just do the trilogy thing and then just fucking stop.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm curious if you had this same feeling as me, Sean, because, when I was watching it and I finished it, one thing that really struck me is, not that I think The Matrix Reloaded is a movie where the Wachowskis didn't give 110%, because that movie clearly was, like, directed with a lot of passion. But you do watch Revolutions and you go, oh, this is the story they wanted to tell. Like, when they were offered sequel opportunities, it feels very much to me like Revolutions is where their heart was, and Reloaded necessarily has to lay a lot of the groundwork, but also Reloaded is kind of where you do your big technical experiments and where you do a lot of the big crowd-pleasing, and kind of put that in that half of the story and clear the deck for this movie, which is these are the 120 minutes of film they really, I think, were most heavily invested in. And I think that means it's not a coincidence that it's the most divisive stretch of The Matrix,
Yeah, I definitely agree that this, like, The Matrix Revolutions feels like a very purposeful movie, and the way that Reloaded felt like a very confused movie to me. Of you don't have the problem of sitting there for like, I think that the big fight, like the robot scene in the middle of the movie, is overlong. I have some issues with it as like a big battle scene that I think is mostly just down to the Wachowskis had never done a big battle scene before. They've done fight scenes, but a battle scene is kind of different. So I have some issues with it in like a technical sense. But I never had the issue I had with the freeway scene of looking at it and being like, well, why is this even happening? The purpose and the meaning and like the narrative thrust and the motivation for it is always very clear and immediate, and it feels very powerful. And that's something I really enjoyed about it, is just feeling like it recaptures more of the energy that the first movie had of feeling like it's got a very clear focus on the story it wants to explore, and then it has this very engaging, multivalent, symbolic approach to storytelling that I also think the second movie misses out on, because the second movie is too invested in sitting down and having the philosophical conversations that I think kind of edge out some of the other more like spiritual or personal and like human based ways to interpret a lot of the symbolism of the Matrix. And the Revolutions movie comes back and it says, let's move more into that kind of more abstract symbolic space with our storytelling, move a little bit out of like the very conversation focused space and back into propulsive action and character change and stuff like that, and deliver a message through those mechanics and less through let's sit down and talk to the Oracle and then let's have some action scenes that don't have anything to do with that conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I do think, and I love The Matrix Reloaded, and I think, love it or hate it, and you don't hate it. You should love it less than you like it less than me. You do need a lot of what Reloaded does to like set up Revolutions. It's like very necessary to have the architect scene, for instance, as like our entree into this movie. But I do definitely agree with that sense of like intentionality and purposefulness, and like Reloaded, it's kind of hard to explain the overall plot thrust of that movie because there's just a ton of moving pieces. Revolutions is really simple. It's and honestly, this is one of the things that's interesting is you talked a lot with the first movie about how much that first movie feels modeled on the first Star Wars. Matrix Revolutions is really directly modeled on Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Down to it does the and other movies have done this too, which I think is the funniest thing to crib from Return of the Jedi, because structurally it's messy, but it is fun to do, is the rescue scene at the beginning. That is kind of like an extra first act. I actually think Matrix Revolutions, of all the times I've ever seen that attempted, integrates it into the structure of the movie better than anything else. Like, in Return of the Jedi, I love Jabba's palace, but it is like a little short film before the actual movie. This is a little more integrated, but you have that. You have the team kind of together. The team splits in two, with the hero having to go confront their maker, their literal father in Return of the Jedi, and their sort of metaphorical father for Neo, because he is part machine, going back to Machine City. And then you have the rest of the group going to the big battle, and then there is the big battle, like holding off the Empire, in this case holding off the machines, and then it comes down to the point of the hero having to fight the final battle sort of one-on-one. And then it even ends the same way as Return of the Jedi, where the ultimate heroism is not fighting, is laying down arms. And I do think it's interesting, and I think that's very intentional. I would imagine the Wachowskis are very aware of that structure that they are cribbing from.
Absolutely, because it feels like, I think Reloaded wanted to be more like Empire Strikes Back than it is. Like, it wants to do the, like, okay, we can split and have Morpheus and Trinity over here and Neo over here and do the parallel storyline stuff, but it doesn't actually know how to like fit that into the story it's trying to tell.
You know what? I had a thought. This is a question I wanted to ask. I do think Morpheus has some really important moments in Revolutions that I like. I think like it's very. I really like the moment that he is the first one to realize the machines are laying down their arms. There's stuff like that I think Morpheus is really important for. I also had the feeling watching this movie that I think a better version of Reloaded would have ended with Morpheus dying. Like, I think there's a version of Reloaded that goes for a more Empire Strikes Back, like, go for the jugular ending. And I can even imagine, like, some kind of captain goes down with the ship moment where he has to stay in the Nebuchadnezzar to save everyone, and he dies with the ship. And that is kind of the dark thing that kicks us into the third movie, because Morpheus does kind of have limited import in this third film. Again, there are I understand why the Wachowskis didn't, because I think there are moments where they really want Morpheus to be the voice of, like, and see how his faith has evolved. I think it is also important that he's the one who, like, looks up at the end and gives us that idea of, like, spirituality. But I also can see there's a part of me that thinks from a franchise standpoint, I wonder if a better ending of Reloaded would have been something a little more knife in the gut.
Yeah, I think that could have, because I do agree that Morpheus, they use him well in like the one or two moments he has, but it doesn't feel like he's used as effectively as possible. I think that could be an option. The thought that I had was I really think that he should have like some, obviously you'd have to like redo some of the mechanics of how this whole sequence works with the EMP and all of that, but having Morpheus be in Zion when the battle is happening and have him be a like central character that we can focus on, that we have like a much bigger investment in, I think would have helped that scene a lot more, because that whole, it's like a 30-minute battle sequence where we don't have any of our principal characters involved in directly whatsoever, and that feels incredibly messy to me. And like that was the thought I had, was, well, Morpheus just isn't doing anything. Like even when they cut to the ship, he's not really doing anything important on the ship. It's Niobe.
It's Niobe's scene.
It's the star of the hit video game Into the Matrix. Niobe is taking care of this for us, not Morpheus. So it feels like, again, you'd have to finagle some of like the plotting and stuff that they have, but that is what I would have done with the character, is use him as our like sort of focal point and kind of fulcrum around which the battle scene moves, rather than having it be a bunch of these secondary characters like Mifune and the kid and the Lynx's girlfriend. Characters that like I can't even remember her name, because she's in like 3 scenes across these 2 movies.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, because I totally understand where that criticism comes from. I have a slightly different take on it, but we'll get there when we get there. Where do you? I think this is a movie though that might be worth just kind of going through in order, because it's not that many scenes even. Like it is a very focused movie. You can break it into basically 4 chunks, like at half-hour marks, pretty easily. And that first chunk is this is the thing that Return of the Jedi has given films that is like most fascinating to me, is this structure that you borrow where you do an extra opening rescue mission. That Return of the Jedi is like the first movie I know of and it's the first third movie kind of in film history in that sense, right? There are other third movies, but more in like a James Bond vein where it's episodic, right? Return of the Jedi was sort of our first big Hollywood trilogy with an ending. And Return of the Jedi does the opening where you have to go to Jabba's palace and rescue Han. And you all know we love Return of the Jedi. It is a verifiably insane way to open a movie.
Yes.
And like mostly other movies that have done it, I think crash on the rocks of that opening, because Return of the Jedi is saved by that 30 minutes being phenomenal. And if you're not phenomenal, it doesn't work. And so the one I always think of is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, where one, it takes them longer to do it, but like you are 45 minutes into that movie before the plot kicks in. And it's just like, fuck. Yeah. Matrix Revolutions, I think, makes it work because it is shorter. It's like 20 minutes. And it is such a clear thesis statement for the movie to come that like it's really essential for the movie. It's not at all a hanger-on at the beginning.
Yeah, because I think there are 2 things here. Like one is that like Return of the Jedi uses that mostly as a way to characterize Luke, right?
Yes.
Like that's why it's so effective, is because it like Luke is a character that you are so intimately close to in the first 2 movies, and then Return of the Jedi puts you at a weird distance from him. It's like why I think probably one of the most like critical cut scenes in any movie I know of is them cutting Luke building his green lightsaber, which is like such a great deleted scene because you love to see that, but it is like such a smart choice to get rid of it. It would have been awful. It would have ruined, I think, like the whole point of the Jabba's palace sequence to have that in there, because you not knowing what Luke's deal is, and you being kind of afraid of him being dressed in black, him being much more aggressive, him being way more powerful, is the whole point of that sequence. And I think it's like, it's so effective at that, and Luke is our main character, so it's like it does serve, while it is structurally very weird, it does serve a really effective narrative purpose. The thing that Matrix Revolutions does is that it is you don't have the character you're trying to rescue removed from it narratively, right? Which is you are focused so much on Neo, and really like the Morpheus Trinity stuff is like whatever, like it's like an excuse for a decent action scene. You get to like, if people didn't pick up the whole Persephone thing in Matrix Reloaded, you really put a nose on it a lot with the scene with the Merovingian in like the Hell nightclub, basically. And you have that, and you get to have a little bit of fun of that. You get to see Seraph again, and that's always fun. But it's really about Neo in Purgatory, and those scenes are fantastic. Like those scenes are so good at place setting the movie. It's such an interesting spot for us to pick up Neo after his like kind of revelations at the end of the previous film, and him having these like kind of quiet moments in, you know, the purgatory of a white bus stop, or like subway station. Like that is such a cool quiet way to start with that character, pick that up, and start sort of the ball rolling on like the Judeo-Christian like theming and symbolizing that this movie goes very heavy on.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's just talk about Neo in the train station, because I think it is I've always kind of liked it, because I think the warmth of that scene of Neo in this mysterious space, and there's this like Indian family there, and he is greeted by this little girl Sati, and then her dad Ramachandra, and the wife, who's a little like more distrusting for very like reasonable reasons we see. And I don't know, you know, as a kid, I don't think I could put words to what I found interesting about that scene. But now, like, I mean, there's a lot going on there. I think the first level is just, I think the world building of having a family of programs who are fighting for something as hard as Neo is. And that is super crucial to what this movie is doing. Reloaded did a lot of table setting for that. But I think this is where you get that payoff of that the machines do have a culture, and they have something like feelings, and we can only kind of glimpse it through a lens that we recognize, but it is something real that is going on with them. And Neo has to be able to connect with that, because the answer to defeating the Matrix is not killing the machines. That is not the purpose of this movie. And that cultural aspect is really important. And then you have these two words that Ramachandra says to Neo. He talks about love, and Neo says, "You're a machine. How can you feel love?" And he says, "It's not a feeling, it's a word. What matters is the connection to it." And then he talks about karma, and he says, "No, karma's not a feeling, it's a word." And he has that whole thing. He says, "I feel karma is what I am here to do. I do not resent my karma." And I really think so much of what Revolutions is doing is kind of not putting them at odds, but putting them on the table next to each other. And a lot of what Neo's journey in this movie is love as this thing you hold on to and will lose, and karma as this duty and this thing that you put into the world. And they are kind of different things. And when you couple that with the themes of death that the Oracle will give us in a couple scenes, you have a very clear thesis statement that the movie is going to explore for 2 hours.
Yeah, and there's like an interesting sort of juxtaposition we have, because I think it's also doing a lot to kind of set up, sort of in a roundabout way, some of what we're dealing with Agent Smith as a program who is like removed from that culture, right? So if like you read it through the like Christianic lens, right, you the programs are like angels, right? Which is something we talked about in the first Matrix, is that Agent Smith has that feeling of a like fallen angel, of Lucifer, right? He becomes too fascinated with humanity, and he's both fascinated and disgusted by it, and it causes his like fall. And here you have this sense of the two programs that are a father and a mother. They give birth to a child program. Where the fuck that means in like a physical sense, I don't know. But like Sati is their child, and the idea of like the programs emulating humans in that way of creating a child and then smuggling her into the Matrix so that she can live a life removed from like the prescribed purpose that the programs have, right? That the programs are bound by strictly and by like physical law the purpose that they are given. Like they have to perform that function, and in many ways it feels like they not only do they have to perform it, they are like they have to enjoy performing it. And they want Sati to have a life that is like a human's, where she is given choice, right? Because that is a thing that they don't have. And I think that that's like a really interesting place to pick up the movie, is like it's an extension of the architect scene, right? That humans are not the only things that want the choice, like, or this like capacity for free will, or a life that they choose for themselves, or whatever it is. Like these programs want to have that as well through some way, and they want to give this to their child whom they love. And that's I think it resonates a lot with these sort of the tension in a lot of like biblical stuff with God, of, you know, this feeling of God being this abstract, like domineering presence that defines all of life and creates it and controls it and rules over it. and creates destiny and creates fate and like can do whatever it wants, and this like human thing is which is on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is more chaos driven, and the angels being attracted to that. It's very Paradise Lost, and I find that like very, and the whole movie is exploring, I think, a lot of those ideas.
And I think part of the structure of the movie that really hits me is that, Neo realizes he has this goal to get to Machine City. But for most of the movie, and honestly up until the moment where he lets Smith assimilate him, he doesn't know why. But he is collecting experiences that will make the moment land. And they're all important. And every encounter he has in this movie is essential. And without any one of them missing, he probably wouldn't figure out what he needs to do at the end. But having this encounter with the programs and realizing that they are more complex than he thought, and that they, like, the kind of ideas of want and choice and free will and any of that he feels is essentially human is also there, that's going to be really key to him staring face to face with the machine that, it's not called this in the movie, but it is called it in like production materials, the Deus Ex Machina, which I think is the funniest fucking thing.
I think we could just call it God, it's like, it's just what it is. It's just God. He goes and sees God.
Yeah, he goes and sees God. That's important. Obviously, the conversation he has with the Oracle is crucial. Him meeting Smith in the physical world, and obviously, most importantly, Trinity, and also Trinity's death. If she were somehow alive in that last scene, it would be very different, because he has to have kind of lost things and learned from that loss, because the movie is also about Neo shedding things throughout the movie until he, approaches God blind and empty, We're almost at a very, like, Buddhist way there. But I think it is starting right from the beginning here, and I love that actor who plays Ramachandra. I just think it's a very, like, nice performance he gives. And I've always liked Sati. I think she's a cute little character, and, everything you said, it's just a really fascinating set of ideas that really lays out ideological, emotional stakes for the movie to come.
Yeah, and it's just, it's very visually striking, just like the metaphor of purgatory being this like place of waiting, right? That is this like stark white subway train that a lot of things have used. Like it partially because we'll talk about the Harry Potter thing, I guess. But I was thinking about those movies, and then I was thinking about that's what the last Harry Potter movie like just takes this imagery like exactly.
Well, it's in the book too, but yeah, the last Harry Potter movie.
The last Harry Potter book takes this imagery exactly. Yeah,
sure. I don't know if Matrix Revolutions invented it either.
It's true, but
yeah,
I think it there's something very particular about the way that it frames it to me that strikes me immediately as like an iconic way of representing this concept.
Well, it is, because it is a and obviously train stations, since the invention of trains, have been this kind of symbol in literature and film and everything. It's a place of crossing. It is a place of literal, forks in the road and different paths to go down, and it is, and it can be invested in this one little hub where you wait to go somewhere. And Neo, and what makes it a strong purgatory is waiting there with no train to get on, right? Is the stark white train station where there is no other place to go, makes it even eerier because you're supposed to be in that place to go somewhere.
Yeah, and it also it is the idea of the source being effectively our heaven equivalent, right? Like it is like where you're trying to go, it is where the creator figure like exists, and it is also where these programs are trying to run away from. Like there's a juxtaposition of heavenly imagery and heavenly symbolism with the like harsh, mechanical, cruel nature of what the machines appear to be. That I think is also, there's like a really powerful symbolic tension there that the movie is setting up here with using, purgatory-like symbolism, and then using the source as like the thing you would look at is like, well, that's, if you're reading the symbol very literally, that would be the heaven equivalent.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other half of this sequence is what Trinity and Morpheus are doing. And yeah, we do get some fun action scenes here. Mostly, I think those scenes are like just kind of callbacks to the original movie to kind of bring you full circle, because the fight in the little like coat room, which is good, it's not the most remarkable thing in the Matrix, but it's also, I think, knowingly brief. It does feel like, it's our last Matrix action sequence with any of these characters, and really kind of in the trilogy, because Neo's fight with Smith at the end is more than a Matrix action sequence. It's a Dragon Ball fight, right?
Yes.
So, like, this is kind of our last version of that. It's a very clear callback to the lobby scene from the original. It ends with Trinity doing the big fucking bullet time kick from the beginning of The Matrix 1, all of that. But really, it is the Hades and Persephone, well, it's the Orpheus myth. It's Trinity going down and having to bring Neo out. This does not, she does not have to keep her eyes closed and not look back. They don't go through all of that. But it is that basic sort of myth of Orpheus and this idea of, love out of the underworld. And of course, it is also an important exchange. The Matrix Reloaded ends with Neo bringing Trinity back from the dead. This movie starts with Trinity bringing Neo back from the dead, and I think the reason that matters is because they're both going to fucking die in this movie, and so much of this movie is about letting go of, not just letting go of life, but seeing the transience of life as its purpose and beauty. I think it has a very, a view of death that I think you and I have talked about on this show, but I don't see in American media that much, frankly.
Really, they should have called this movie The Matrix Resurrections, because...
it kind of is, but and I do love the Merovingian here. I think if you want to have your character who is the, leader of the underworld, which he's coded as in Reloaded, but it's not as literal as it is here, he's the right character for that. And I do think Trinity's move of just pointing a gun at his head and saying, either we all fucking die or you give me what I want, does definitely confirm that Trinity is the stealth MVP of this series. She gets shit done. She's the first person who kills an agent, never forget, in Matrix 1. She gets the fucking job done. Trinity is very good at what she does.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's a fun little scene. Yeah, and I there's something I do really love about the Merovingian, totally mask off here. We're not trying to do anything subtle with the imagery. This is just Hades. Here we go. We're in the underworld. It is what it is.
Well, and it's that version of Hades where it's the idea that it doesn't fully come from Greek mythology, but certainly has evolved over the ages as this figure of excess and kind of down in the underworld, rules everything once for nothing. It's kind of interesting. We've had this move back towards fascination with the Hades myth in the last couple of years with stuff like Hades Town and the game Hades. And this presages that by 10, 15 years, but is interesting to see in that lens too.
Yeah, in him being this sort of very, he's so materialistic, right? And he's so material focused, which is not, it's not directly pulled from Greek mythology, but I think you get that more with some of the Roman interpretation with Pluto, right? And wealth and the idea of wealth being associated with the underworld. You have to pay your tithe if you're going there, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I also love that they always call him the Frenchman in this movie.
Yes.
So you get that line from Ramachandra, which is, the Frenchman never forgets, and he does not forgive. And I just love that they always call him the Frenchman. It's very funny.
Yes, although there's one time where I think when Trinity has the gun pointed to him, she calls him Vinge, right? Is that what it is?
No, she calls him Merv.
Merv, that's what it is. She calls him Merv. It is just a very, fuck you kind of moment that I really love.
Trinity's great. I think Carrie-Anne Moss's best material in the trilogy is this movie. For one obvious scene, her death scene is her best performed scene. But I think all through, I think she's fucking great in this movie. So
yeah, there's one exchange that I think is a little bit awkward, but it's a dialogue thing. We'll get to it. But yes, generally speaking, I think she does some really great work here.
Yeah. All right. So then we kind of have the next thing is sort of when we kick into more of your traditional first act stuff, which is figuring out where we're going. We're back on the ship. We're dealing with Bane is going around doing his thing. We'll talk about him in a minute. You have figuring out what these two ships are going to do. Neo basically goes off and meditates, I feel is the implication. Because Neo just says, I have to figure stuff out, and then we don't see him for 20 minutes while everyone else is putting the pieces of the plot together. And then he comes out to say look, I've meditated, I've gone to the top of the mountain, I figured out I need to go meet God. Can someone give me a ship? I need to go meet God. And Niobe, man, Niobe is the other stealth MVP of this movie. She's a fairly minor character in Reloaded. She is obviously the star of the hit video game Enter the Matrix. I love Niobe in this movie. I think she's fucking cool.
Yeah, she's cool. I do think there is there is something to the I don't know if the character has ever got a full proper real intro to me. There's a slight awkwardness to that of I think there is a little bit of the Enter the Matrix-y like interconnectedness of that character that makes her feel slightly awkward in the movies. And it also like they never do anything to explain what the fuck is her relationship to Morpheus and that other captain. Like what is any of that stuff is like. I thought there was going to be more of a like confrontation there. There's something weird in their relationship that feels like there was something there that was supposed to be more significant than it is, I guess.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, but they do, but I like that she's the one who gives Neo the ship, and I think is the one who, she has a very key line in that scene where she says, like, where Morpheus says, thank you for giving Neo the ship or something, and she says, to be clear, I don't believe in the one, I believe in him. And that is actually, I think, a very key turning point in the whole... Because this movie also, one of the words it is really invested in is belief. And it is very invested in reframing the word belief from what it is in Matrix 1 and 2, which is belief in this divine providence and this plan, to belief in other people and the purpose of the cause. And that belief is something that actualizes itself. Which actually is kind of what the word karma means in actual, like... Hindu philosophy, is more sort of in that vein. So reframing it from predestination to like an act of belief. So there's stuff like that. We'll talk about Niobe more later, but anyway.
Yeah, but I do think actually that line kind of is part of what I mean of like, it never felt like she had a relationship to Neo in any way in like
That's
a
fair,
character
yeah.
sense. So like there's like weird gaps there that feel slightly unearned unless you've played the hit video game Enter the Matrix, of course.
Yeah. I think, because we talked about this last week a little bit, I think people frame this wrong. I think when people say like, oh, there's stuff in the movies you can't understand if you haven't played the game. From a plot sense, that's just not true. That's false. That's 100% not true. You do not need to play Enter the Matrix to understand why Niobe is in the car at the moment when Morpheus needs her. Like, she's cool and she drove and did the thing. You do not need to play the level on the highway and Enter the Matrix to get that, right? Mm-hmm. That's a very normal movie thing to have a Deus Ex Machina kind of come in. I do think there might be something to the critique that for the Wachowskis making all of this, Niobe has to be more important to them than she comes across in these two movies, because they're also making 45 minutes of cutscenes with her and writing this whole video game. And so for them, Niobe has a huge life as a character, and we get part of it in the movies, but not all of it. And I do probably agree with the critique that, like, they probably don't do enough in the two movies she's in to firmly establish her as a character just within these movies.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to frame it, of, like, there's not the, I think, character investment, or the audience investment in the character based on the movies that, like, the movies assume there is. Because I like Niobe. I also really like Ghost, and he has more lines in this movie than he had in the last one. Not a lot,
That's true,
but he does have more. But I like Ghost and Niobe because I played that video game, not necessarily because I like them, like, specifically in these movies. Certainly, I don't like Ghost because of his role in this movie. I would never know anything about Ghost as a character or acknowledge his existence if it were not for the fact that he is the one I played as when I first played Into the Matrix when I was, like, 9 or whatever.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. But yeah, so this section, like I said, is mostly table setting, but there's a couple of obviously very important things to talk about here. The most important would be all the stuff with Bane, who is the character in the real world who is being controlled by Agent Smith, or is just Agent Smith.
Yeah.
It's Agent Smith's consciousness in his body. We get him on the ship doing weird shit, and then there is the scene before Neo and Trinity take off where he fights Neo and blinds him. And I think for Sean, a couple minutes here, we have to sing the fucking praises of that actor. His name is Ian Bliss, and he plays Bane. It is fucking eerie, creepy, like how good it is, how much he embodies Hugo Weaving's performance, because there's no trick. They didn't do something like have Hugo Weaving dub him or something like that. Although there are moments where it could trick you. He just embodies that character. He studied Hugo Weaving. You just buy 100% that this is one person in another person's body. It is the best special effect in this movie, and it's just performance.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It's, in some senses, it's almost like too good, because I can't buy that it takes Neo so long to figure out who it is.
Yes.
It's like, because that's just him. Like, yeah, his face is different, but it's like, that's clearly the same character. Yeah, and it's like very impressive in live action. It's the kind of thing that like I feel like is also very anime-y, because anime will do stuff like this a lot, particularly at like cyberpunkish anime from the 90s likes to do this kind of thing, because it's way easier to do in anime because you don't have to worry about an actual physical person. You can just draw it the way you want, and you can draw the facial expressions to be whatever you want them to be, and you can do whatever you want to with the voice actors, either use the original voice actor or use a new voice actor. So there's a lot more leeway in animation to do this kind of mechanic and make it with a character, make it work really well. And I think it is phenomenally impressive that they just absolutely nail it in live action, which I think seems just like technically very complicated and relies so much on the talents of just Ian Bliss as an actor to be able to get across not just like the voice and the cadence and all of that, but the physicality of Agent Smith and Hugo Weaving as well. He just is able to capture the whole thing so well.
And it's so crucial to what this movie is doing, and also to like Smith as a presence, because during this whole stretch, we see Smith once, which is when he goes and absorbs the Oracle, right? But other than that, like Hugo Weaving does not have a ton of scenes in this movie. He's at the beginning and he's at the end. But Smith as a character has a huge presence in this movie, because you have this like solid half hour where Ian Bliss is doing this, and that idea of having the character is the character and it's split across bodies here is really interesting. And it's, I think it's one of those ideas that goes back to some of the foundational things the Wachowskis are interested in the entire metaphor of the Matrix, which is consciousness and the body being two different things. This is something that will animate some of their later work like Cloud Atlas and Sense8. This is something they love to do. And it's a really fascinating way to do it here, because again, there is no special effect. There is no technical wizardry. It's just good acting. And, it reminds me of that. People will always say this about Superman the movie. The best special effect in Superman the movie is Christopher Reeve, because when he puts on the glasses, he's Clark Kent, and when he takes them off, he's Superman, and you never doubt it for a second. And, the flying effects could be fucking shit in that movie, and you wouldn't care. And it's the same here with what Ian Bliss does. It just sells that so well. And again, making the boundaries between the Matrix and reality so permeable, which we're already, and again, extending that analysis that like Smith is Neo's opposite, because Neo is now breaking those boundaries, so why can't Smith do it?
Yeah, of course, because the whole opening of the movie of Neo in Purgatory, part of that is also that he is not physically plugged into the Matrix, right? He is mentally like trapped in that place, but his body is not actually physically plugged into the machine. Which is a good like concept. And yes, there's a sense in the Matrix Revolutions of like the nature of reality as we've like had it be very firmly established in the first Matrix, of there is the fake cyber world of the Matrix, and then there is the real world of Zion and the machines and the battery farms and all that shit. And this is breaking all that down and sort of collapsing that into it's all one reality, right? Like the you that you are in the Matrix is the you are in the real world. The you are in the real world is the you are in the Matrix. Like you are this conscious being of light or whatever. And if you attain the oneness, or if you're like Agent Smith, you can travel freely between those different like sort of folds of reality, however you want.
Yeah, and I also think there's, you can also bring back some of the ideas from like the trans reading of Matrix 1 and put all of that in here, that gets maybe a little muddled or is not focused on in Matrix Reloaded. Yeah.
Yeah, because I do think it's a lot of this stuff is the stuff I really like about this movie, that I do think Reloaded, because Reloaded feels so interested in just sitting down and talking about the concepts it has in the movie, that like it loses a lot of that multivalent quality to it, whereas here there's such a richness to the idea of the permeability of the realities that we are experiencing, and these two characters being able to travel across it, that you can read so much into that concept because it's so rich. And you don't have to have like Neo is not sitting down with the Oracle or Trinity or somebody and having to have like a 5-minute conversation about, I can't believe that he's able to blah 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 blah. Like you just have it all communicated through the action of these sequences.
What do you think of the big fight scene in that lower deck where Trinity turns off the lights and there's all the flashing, and obviously Neo gets fucking blinded, and then he doesn't actually hit Bane's head off, but in the like Matrix vision he hits Bane, like Smith's head off.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. I think that's a really fantastic sequence, and I think it's one of the things that when I say this movie is pricklier, that's not a like fun, cool kung fu, Seraph is doing cool footwork fight sequence. That's a brutal, this hurts fight sequence.
Yeah, it's a like Alien kind of scene, you know.
Yeah.
There is a lot of like Alien and aliens in this movie, and that has that quality of that. It's very horror-ish, right? It's the lights go off. There's like a stalking quality to it. I do love that Agent Smith just like completely lampshades the like blind prophet messiah thing where he's like,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, the blind prophet, the blind messiah, blah, 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 and he just goes on about it, and it's like, thank you, Mr. Agent Smith. It's like, because you kind of almost need to lampshade it because it's almost too on the nose that it's like very good. And then it is I have always remembered and really loved this moment, and it's one of the things that when I talked about when we did the Reloaded episode, that I remembered some of this stuff being in Matrix Reloaded. For whatever reason, I had that stuff out of order, but I've always loved the scene of him backing Agent Smith into a corner. Agent Smith doesn't think he's being backed into a corner. He thinks he's luring Neo. Neo is actually backing him in, and then you get Neo's POV shot where you can see that he sees Smith's soul, right? He's not looking with his like physical eyes. And that Neo is actually just backing him into a corner to fucking beat him to death with a goddamn pipe.
It's pretty good. Yeah, the specific line you were talking about, Sean, is he says, I wish you could see yourself, Mr. Anderson. Blind Messiah. You're a symbol for your kind, Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
It's because you also have all of Bane's dialogue about, like, being in this fleshy body and how much he fucking hates that. And he's like, I'm in this rotting corpse of meat. There's the line about cow eyes. I need to look this up because it is so good. He says, let's see, this is, nothing this weak is meant to survive. And he's trying to get, and this is where Neo is confused. He's trying to get him, like, see me, I am Smith. And he says, look through the gelatin of these soft cow eyes. That might be my favorite Agent Smith line. That is a phenomenal piece of sentence construction. And again, his disdain for the human body being expressed here through the idea of rotting, which is key because transience is the superpower of this movie. Like, the big idea of Matrix Revolutions, I think if I were to boil it down to one fucking thing, is that transience is the thing that gives humanity its power, and it is the thing that disgusts Smith the most.
Yeah, and that he is trying to attain like a form of immortality that is, you know, like sort of forbidden or something, of where he's in order to avoid his death or his end, because, you know, Neo really put the fear of God in that motherfucker when Neo killed him at the end of the first movie. He is exploding his consciousnness across as many different individuals as possible and trying to spread himself as far as possible so that if this Agent Smith dies, that doesn't matter because Smith lives on, and he's rejecting that kind of transience, that death that he experienced at the end of the first movie. It's calling back to some of that stuff from the end of the first Matrix of him, you know, the lines about the smell and his hate for it. But the thing I like about Smith is like it's clear like he hates it, but he fucking loves it too, right? Like he's like he needs it, right? It's like it's his same thing with Neo or Mr. Anderson is like he fucking hates Neo, but it's like he's so fascinated by him. He's like obsessed with him. Again, in this very, you know, Paradise Lost, Satan in the Garden of Eden thing of like this hatred for humanity taking the love of God and also this fascination with these weird creatures, and his desire to play and toy with them and taunt them with the apple and all of that. There's a lot of that kind of quality to Smith here that is. It is the thing I said when we did the first episode of the Matrix podcast, that he's the best fucking character. Like he is the best character in these movies, and it's for exactly this kind of shit.
Well, you know, Sean, you and I have talked a lot on this show about, I think, our fascination with like devil characters in media, like Satan characters. The most boring version of that is the character who's just coded as like pure evil. I don't give a shit about that. The interesting versions of a devil character to me are the like schemer who gets you to do the evil thing without knowing he's manipulating you. That's a version of the devil I love. And then this, which is what you're talking about, which is that Paradise Lost hates humanity and is enraptured by it. Those are like, this is where you've done the reading and you know why the devil is cool, right?
Yeah, and his rebellious nature with God, of where like there's that he thinks that he is attaining this power, and of course, like, it is nothing, because it can't be anything. Like, he has to be an insignificant existence. But it's like, it's the Paradise Lost thing is that, like, Satan is the reason why that epic poem is so interesting. It's why like Satan's fucking cool. Like, he's a cool, interesting, complicated, dynamic character, and it's for this like rebellious, like, insanity of the character, and his love and hatred for humanity, that's so awesome. And then fucking Smith, as played by both Hugo Weaving and Ian Bliss in this movie, embodies that so well.
Yes, absolutely. I want to talk about Neo being blinded, but I also just want to talk about the visuals of him being blinded, because like I said, this movie is way gorier than the first two Matrix movies. Like, this is the only Matrix that really feels R-rated to me. Reloaded has some of the sex stuff, but I don't think that's as bad, because I'm not a crazy person who thinks sex is worse than violence. But, like, the violence of Matrix 1 and 2 is very bloodless, generally. It is very kinetic. It's in that, like, Hong Kong John Woo kind of action vein. You know, John Woo movies have a whole lot of bullets, and it's not like you're seeing brains go everywhere, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, this movie it's not Evil Dead, but it's pretty gory. Like, it does have, like, little things like Trinity kicking Smith's face in, or Bane's face in, and just, like, breaking his nose, and blood flies everywhere. You have, obviously, in the big fight in Zion, there's a bunch of stuff, like the woman who Z is with, who gets, like, the fucking the sentinel, like, goes through her leg.
Oh god,
and stabs her everywhere. You have Mifune, when he dies, he gets all those big lacerations on his face.
Yeah, it feels like they got some, like, 80s slasher movie fucking, like, art, like, makeup person
Tom
back
Savini.
out.
It's like,
yes,
that's what it looks like.
It's a very Tom Savini-esque, like, really good, just like, fuck, that's awful makeup. With the giant gash going across his entire face.
And then, you know, probably the most upsetting, because it's a character we know so well, is Neo. You have, you know, Keanu Reeves with this, like, really gnarly makeup to show his eyes burned shut, you know? And then he is blind for the rest of the movie. And that has always stuck with me, because, man, I can't name another, like, big franchise sequel like this that halfway through the movie disfigures your main character like that, you know? Mm-hmm. And it is really striking, and it's, I think, one of the things that makes Revolutions feel oppressively dark to some people. But I also think it opens the most beautiful stuff in the movie, because the entire idea of, the blind prophet thing is very obvious, but what they do with it, of Neo stops seeing with physical eyes, and he now sees the machine world in this beautiful luminescence, that is one of the coolest images the Wachowskis have ever come up with, and frankly, in 21st century Hollywood, I've ever seen. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, and it really is the thing that hits at that, like, symbolic tension of the heavenly lights of the machine world and the fucking hellscape that it also is. There is something very, very powerful about that contrast. And it is interesting to see a big Hollywood movie like this, just, as you say, go full on and horribly disfigure its main character. And put it in where, like, that's the point where, you know, Neo's definitely dying at the end of this movie. Like, there's no way you don't do this kind of thing to a main character and then let them live, because in some ways that's always feels like more like mean-spirited in some way, of like, we're going to fuck him the fuck up, and now he has to live the rest of his life with all of his bones broken and shit like that. When you get that, like, the progressive injury thing, and them slowly, like, getting, like, falling to pieces physically, that's when I feel like, you know, that, okay, this is not just them gesturing towards the character's death, that it's going to be a very, like, big final death for this character, and the moment that he loses his eyes is the moment I think you know that instinctively as an audience.
So, absolutely, and I think this brings me back to one thing we haven't talked about from the first hour, but we need to spend a good chunk of time on, which is all the Oracle stuff. Mm-hmm. Because this is where I think the maybe most important thematic through line of the movie comes in, which is death. This is not just a movie where the main character dies at the end. This is a movie about death. And it is a movie that is, like, very self-awarely about death. And it's not just the blinding scene, Sean, but I think when you watch the movie, you could be forgiven the first time you watch the movie for not expecting Neo to die, because that's such a rare thing for Hollywood to do at the end of a trilogy like this, right? You know? or anyone. It's just rare to kill your two main characters in a story. That's a rare thing. And when you know that's going to happen, though, I think it is remarkable. The first hour of this movie, it tells you that's going to happen over and over again. Like, the whole subtext, and some of it just becomes text in what they say when Trinity says she's going with Neo, and they have that speech when they're talking in their chamber before they leave, is just a very clear, like, I'm with you to the end, and I know this is probably the end. And it's this, like, very aware moment. All of the stuff, like what the Oracle is implicitly telling Neo is you're going to die, and that you being able to end is your actual superpower. All of that, like, the movie is just, it's not a surprise, it's not a twist ending. It's the ending that is very clearly being built up to from the opening moments where he's in purgatory. It's not, none of it's accidental.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's an extension of the ending of The Matrix Reloaded of him saving Trinity. But of course, that, when you know that she's going to die at the end of the third movie, that scene with the architect is slightly different, of where the architect is right? Like, Trinity is going to die. Like, this. And part of it is, like, regardless of whether Neo saves her from the fall into the car there, regardless of whether he was somehow able to avoid her death in the ship, right? Eventually she's going to die. Like, you cannot save her forever because she is mortal. And there's something about, like, that. I think when you watch The Matrix Reloaded without knowing anything about what the plot of the third movie is going to be, you don't necessarily know whether or not that moment where he saves Trinity at the end is actually him, like, defying fate, or it's delaying the inevitable. And of course it is delaying the inevitable. And that's where the third movie is about that inevitability and what it means.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Oracle. There's a couple of things obviously going on with the Oracle here. One of them being that there is a recast. The original actress who played the Oracle, Gloria Foster, passed away during the shooting of the big. They basically shot Reloaded and Revolutions back to back, because that's kind of how you have to do it, is get most of the stuff for the movie you have to get out shot first, so that you can send it to the VFX artists and stuff. There definitely was some overlapped shooting. I imagine that with a big combined shoot like this, what you do is anything that shares a set between the two movies you shoot at once, and anything that doesn't you order so that the movie coming out first gets shot first. So that's probably why Gloria Foster had her scenes shot for Reloaded. She sadly passes away. They recast her with a woman named Mary Alice, who is still alive. She's 79. I was just looking this up. And she plays the Oracle for the third movie. And instead of just having it be a recast and not commenting on it, I think in a good move, because this is The Matrix and it is a story about bodies changing, like, you should probably take that opportunity to comment on it. They do build it into the plot, and you have the Oracle actually is played by Mary Alice here more than Gloria Foster plays her in the first two, because she has many more scenes in this third movie. The first one being where Trinity and Morpheus go to see her, and we start to see that this entire idea of her body having changed is this idea of a choice that was made that I think is largely implied to be something to do with Neo surviving in purgatory and, like, giving this second chance. And that is where the story kind of kicks in.
Yeah, the way I read it is that her giving Neo and Morpheus and them, like, the breadcrumbs to get them to the Merovingian, pissed the Merovingian off, and he's then the one who, like, that is why he then, like, forces her to regenerate. There's a very Doctor Who quality to the way that they handle it, of, like, it does feel like there's, like, the Matrix Doctor Who that happened where she, like, fell on the ground and exploded into, like, an effect of light, or maybe it would be the more old school one of you just do a crossfade and then this other actress kind of gets up. But, like, the way they talk about it, of her changing her face, or it's almost like the way that the second Doctor, the third Doctor is. It's a very similar kind of dialogue and concept for being forced to change her physical appearance.
Yes.
But then it is. I mean, it's very, very sad that Gloria Foster passed away, because she was she was just such an incredible actress and so good as this character in the first two movies. But they did handle it, like, better than I think that this has ever been handled in anything I've ever seen, because it is able to be built into the mechanics of the world itself. And it thematically resonates with the rest of the story. So it does fit in for the movie quite well.
And I think Mary Alice is great. And it's
Yeah.
great in a very Doctor Who-esque sense where it is clearly the same underlying like being in there, but she also gives her own spin on it. She doesn't
Yeah.
do a Gloria Foster impersonation. I do very much feel a Doctor Who sort of thing there, and she is really good. I like where Gloria Foster is like a little more like sort of warm and almost like sing-songy in how she talks. That then you have Mary Alice, who's like she's still a very warm person, but much quieter and sort of more precise with how she speaks. I think it's a good shift, and I think the character works here for me 100%.
Yeah, and you know the Oracle in this movie is pushed into a space where it's clear that like she doesn't. I mean, as she said, really doesn't know what's going to happen. That this is like a true crossroads. Where she doesn't know what's going to go be beyond the path that Neo is choosing, whether or not like the peace that she desires between the machine world and the human world can actually be achieved. I think that's an interesting place for the character. I also love the like dynamic of Sati, right, is at the Oracle's place, and that's where you realize that all the kids in the first movie, right, the like Spoon Kid and all of them are also presumably children of other programs, and that's like one of the things the Oracle does is like people's programs smuggle their child programs into the Matrix so that they can live their own lives free from the source and like the sort of destined programming that God or the Deus Ex Machina giant robot face man gives everybody, and they can live their lives and choose the life that they want, like with the Oracle kind of helping them.
Yeah, and I also just love the idea that the Oracle is the Oracle to the machines, too. She's not just an Oracle to the people. The machines and the programs go seek her out for the same reasons that the people do, basically, which is for, like, guidance and purpose, you know? And I think that's a really cool touch that we realize in this scene. I just love that every time you kind of push on the machine culture, you get a little glimpse into this giant world over here that we do not have access to, but it always feels very firm that it is there, you know?
Yeah, and you get a really good bit of it then in the next Oracle scene with Agent Smith, and I love the fact that like Agent Smith has this he has some sort of pre-existing relationship with Seraph. That might be a thing in Enter the Matrix. I don't remember, because Seraph is in Enter the Matrix, and I don't know if that is a thing there or if that's just world building, because it works either way.
They suggest a pre-existing relationship with Smith, but also with the Merovingian. They very strongly suggest here that Seraph was one of the Merovingian's ghosts at one point. So I like that too. Yeah,
and then Smith's dialogue with the Oracle and him taunting her is such a good like way of again like giving you this sense of the way that the programs in the machine world and its culture like views the other members in it, because they have always been kind of segmented off, right? Like the Merovingian is his own thing, Smith and the agents are their own thing, or the Smith is his own thing, the agents are their own thing, the Oracle is her own thing, and she got Seraph. And now you're getting like all of the pieces of that world intersecting, and so you get to see some scenes of just I love this. I love having scenes where it's just programs talking to each other. There aren't any humans in the whole scene of Smith and Sati and Seraph and the Oracle. That's all just programs talking to each other. You don't have any like actual human beings in those sequences.
It's how the movie ends, Sean. The movie ends with programs talking to each other.
Yeah, so it is removed from any of like the human culture. It is the either you just take it like literally they are the programs, or you can do the more like they're angels. And there's some sort of like divine kind of existence. Either way, like that is always, I think it's very interesting to see scenes like that and see how they're written and performed.
I think one of the most provocative lines of the whole movie, the whole trilogy, is so Smith comes into the kitchen. Well, Smiths come into the kitchen, and the Oracle asks, "What did you do to Sati?" And then one of the other Smiths says, "Cookies need love like anyone else." And then they all laugh. And then the Oracle says, "You are a bastard." And he looks at her and says, "You would know, Mom."
Mom. Yeah.
That is a fucking mic drop of a line, because you can go into the literal, like, the lore of that is fascinating, but also, like, the psychoanalysis of it is fascinating. I think the angel connotation, the divinity connotation becomes really interesting when you consider Smith calling the Oracle his mom, and then you can also read motivation. Is that does he feel like a scorned child? Is it just making fun of her? Is it very literal? There's so much there. And Sean Hugo Weaving in this movie, he is giving one of the best villain performances ever. It is so shit-eating grin wonderful. I fucking love it.
Yeah, that scene with him in the Oracle in particular is like, if Hugo Weaving for the rest of the Matrix series is always at an 11, because he's always at a fucking 11, that's him cranking it up to like a 23 or something. Like,
yes.
I mean, that sequence after, all the stuff with the Oracle happens, he literally does a diabolical laugh into camera. Like,
he does, yeah, it's so good.
It's so over the top, but in the perfect way. Like, it's just, he's completely off his fucking rocker, but of course he is, right? He's like, his consciousness is now this like exploded grotesque thing where he is just absorbing everything else in the Matrix. And then, but it's also, there's those little moments like when he is absorbing the Oracle and everything is going crazy, like the whole house is shaking and you see, I think that's like one of the first times you get that like luminescent imagery of the machines, and you see how bright the Oracle is, and she gets absorbed by Smith, and there's that moment of like fear and disquiet and hesitation in him of not being sure whether or not he succeeded, which then kind of presages that comes back then at the end of the final fight of the movie. But those little moments of hesitation also then followed by, but I did it, like ha 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 ha.
I mean,
great.
this is why I love the Wachowskis, Sean.
Yeah.
No one else would do the big, crazy Saturday morning cartoon villain laugh into camera after a scene like that, and that's why The Matrix rocks. That's why the Wachowskis are fun. Like, this is something other directors don't do. If you have Hugo Weaving, you let him do that. Why the fuck not? It's so great. The Lord of the Rings is almost perfect, but it never has Elrond do an evil laugh. Be a little weird if Elrond did that.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean. It's great. I also love his line when his I think creepiest scene is when he's going to absorb Sati and Seraph, and he's like leaning down, like he's on his he's like crouched down talking to Sati, and she says like, she told me you're a bad man, and he says, oh, I'm not so bad once you get to know me. And with the implication being that a second later, I mean, we cut, but a second later he is shoving his hand in her and assimilating her. I mean,
yes, yeah.
Fuck,
She
gets
to know him in the sense that she gets to become him. Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of glossed over what the Oracle says to Neo, but, they do a little bit of the cleanup of the architect scene and, the confirmation that, yeah, I'm a program, all of this stuff, the one was sort of this thing, and she talks about how the architect's purpose was to balance the equation. I also love that she lampshades the architect a little bit, and it's like, Neo says like, well, he said for sure all of this would happen, and she said, oh, he can't see past, the front of his nose. Like, we can't see past the choices we make, but he can't even understand choices, right? And she says, his purpose was to balance the equation. My purpose is to unbalance it. I love the way Mary Alice wraps her lips around the word unbalance it. It's a great little line reading. But she also wants to end the war. And I think this is also really key, is this idea that the programs, the machines, don't uniformly want there to be a war going on either. It is not in their best interest. This is not something that they are all happy with either. And that is the thing that she is working towards. And that is the reason I think Neo trusts her, is because that, above all else, that desire seems very real in her.
Yeah, there's and it's true. It reads true of the programs we see at the beginning of the movie. That like they're people, man. Like they have their own thing. They're doing their own shit. And it doesn't feel like they have no enmity towards humanity. It is only the programs like the agents that are designed to do it that we ever see have this like direct hatred for humanity.
Yeah. And and then, as you say, what's very interesting is that the Oracle's vision is finite in this movie because she says she's made a choice and she can't see beyond that. We learn in the next scene that choice is being assimilated. She knows she's going to let that happen, and then from there on out, obviously she cannot see what's going to happen beyond that. But she gives this whole speech to Neo, and one of the lines that I think is very interesting is she has this line that you have heard in the marketing of a bajillion different movies, which is everything that has a beginning has an end. That is one of those, like, I feel like Star Wars has used that. prequels have used that in general the opposite way around. Everything that has an end has a beginning. But also a lot of like trilogy cappers have used that. That was in the marketing of this movie. It's a common marketing line, but it actually means something here. The Oracle is actually trying to convey something very meaningful here. She connects this line, this idea of ending. She immediately jumps into Agent Smith and saying, he is your opposite, your negative, the equation balancing itself out. And the implication, especially if you know what's coming in the movie, is that Neo's ultimate power to negate Smith is to be able to end. That Smith is infinite and unstopping, and Neo is finite because he is human. And where we're going with this movie is that his, ability to be finite is the key to unlocking this entire thing. And I think it's one of the best pieces of writing for the Oracle, because I don't think she knows, but she isn't like just saying to him, you're going to have to die, kid. What she's doing is giving him the like ideological, philosophical framework through which to understand that choice when it is presented to him.
Yeah, because then, of course, that's the line that Agent Smith then echoes at the end of the movie, not understanding what he's saying it or why.
And it triggers in Neo that understanding. And it's like this very clear moment where, and I think Keanu Reeves plays it beautifully, you see all of his encounters over this movie coming together in a moment of understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll talk about all of that more on the other side of the movie, but I think this is one of the best written Oracle scenes. I think all of the Oracle scenes are really good, but I really love this one. It also is one of those scenes that feels very final, in that we're back in that kitchen. She has a direct callback to the thing on the door, know thyself. There's just this sense of, she talks about like
baking the cookies, or they're making the batter for the cookies, and he gets there before they get made, right?
Yeah. And she has the whole line about like, when you first came here, you were so jittery, and now you're this. And so there is this sense of full circle that this story is ending.
Yeah, because it's also like the whole setup to that scene is Neo deciding to go back into the Matrix, saying like, we need to go talk to the Oracle because it's the last time. I think it's the last time I'll be able to. So yeah, you have that sense of finality, and I really love the way the Oracle is written here, where like all of the affectation has come off, right? Like she has always had that very kind of playful, I'm toying with the truth and I'm sort of playing with you a little bit in a like good spirited way, but she is very manipulative in the first two movies, and here it's like that shit's just all gone. Like it's like, nope, like we are here. We are at the end of all of this, and what it's going to happen, I don't know. But she sees very clearly she's treating Neo like an equal at this point, not a child that she has to sort of like tease with cookies and stuff like that.
Yes. All right. So the next, obviously, big stretch of the movie is the big fight in Zion, and this is kind of the next thing we want to break down, because you are not the only person to voice this complaint with the movie, Sean. I did specifically time it so we have actual numbers to work with here, and we're not just like gesticulating wildly to the length of this thing. You cut from Neo and Trinity on the ship after he's been blinded back to Zion at 58 minutes and 30 seconds into the movie, and I would consider that the start, because you specifically cut to Harry Lennox preparing for the battle, and like everything's getting ready.
Yeah, the much beleaguered Harry Lennox, who just like nobody gives him fucking anything. Everyone's giving him shit. They're like, oh, when is Neo gonna get here? What about the Nebuchadnezzar? He's like, I'm trying to fight a fucking war, okay? Like, can you give me a goddamn like soldier or some shit?
He does a good job. Yes. He was not gonna win that thing on his own. But man, if he weren't giving it his all and his soldiers weren't giving it their all, there would be no Zion for Neo to save.
Yeah,
so
the
give Harry
hero.
Lennox some respect. Yeah. Especially Mifune, but we'll get to him. So, okay, that's at 15 minutes, 30 seconds. The EMP, so the big focus of that sequence is that the Hammer, which is the ship that they are on, needs to get into Zion and detonate the EMP. The EMP is blown at 1 hour, 22 minutes, so it's about a 23-minute action sequence, and then there's a couple minutes of, like, falling action. We cut back to Neo at 1 hour, 26 minutes. So in total, it's about 28 minutes between cuts to Neo. So it's almost a half hour of the movie. Not all of that is action. I think it's a tighter sequence than it gets credit for. I am not going to pretend that it is not long and big, but I also think that it is fairly focused in which planes of action we are cutting to, and it does very clearly whittle itself down to a point where the big thing that needs to happen is get that gate open, get the hammer through, blow the EMP. It is not aimless as an action sequence. And I think it's stunningly staged. I think it's really interesting. I think seeing that many Sentinels, this is what we were talking about with Reloaded. Reloaded doesn't show us the threat of the Sentinels. This movie fucking gives us the money shots, and it's incredible. And I personally, it's not that I don't understand the critique that there aren't, like, this big stretch doesn't involve our main characters, but I do think there's some intentionality to it of them being previously minor characters who now have to hold down the fort best they can while the big characters do the big stuff. I think that's intentional and important and interesting, and I think it is something that fleshes out, for me, Zion and why it is worth fighting for. And I like seeing some of these characters who maybe had a little spark in the last movie, like Mifune and the kid and Z, who is Harold Perrineau's wife, or that's Link's wife, kind of come into their own over the course of this sequence. Particularly, I like the relationship between Mifune and the kid a lot. And so it works for me on that level. And I do find the spectacle of it very moving and engaging, because it is, as you say, Sean, it's a battle. It's not a fight. Yeah. It's not something else. This is a fucking war sequence. And I think it gives you the punch. It makes you feel it. I think it is probably a little overlong in places. It does work for me very well, though.
I'm very mixed on it personally. I think for me, I think part of it is that I agree that, like, there is an intentionality to using these very minor characters and having the principal characters removed from it. I think the problem is, I think the characters are too minor. It's like Mifune's in literally one shot of The Matrix Reloaded. Like, he's not a character in that movie. Z is in one scene in The Matrix Reloaded, right? It's the scene where Link comes home, and, like, that's it. The kid's in, like, two scenes. But they're so minor. There's nothing else with them in this movie. It is like, I think we even have, like, one scene of kind of plate setting earlier on, but it's basically like, we're really hardcore on Neo Trinity stuff, and then now we're going to have a giant action scene in Zion, and I just feel like it's a bit unbalanced. And it just feels to me like I think the Wachowskis just didn't have the experience for, like, these kinds of big battle sequences, because they have the right instinct of, like, focusing on key moments, and I think, like, that stuff tends to be pretty decent. I think the ending of the battle is very good, because it does, as you say, whittle to a very good point, and it has a very clear climax. I think my issue with it is I think all these sort of interstitial stuff is very messy. Honestly, like, this sequence feels to me like it is designed to be intercut with the scene of, like, a bigger version of Neo and Trinity and Agent Smith on their ship, because there are moments where it feels like way more time has passed in the fight or in the battle than we have seen, even though it's one long contiguous sequence. It isn't cutting away to Neo ever. Like, it is one big long contiguous scene, and there are just moments where it feels like time has passed or something has happened. I think, like, in that big middle stretch of the battle, there's just, like, no focus or like variety to what's happening, and so I think it just becomes very exhausting to me. It's not a thing where I think it's like a bad battle sequence, but it is, to me, I think it is easily the weakest part of this movie, because it is just, like, it's very, very rough around the edges.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying mostly. I don't agree with the like, cutting element of it. I'm very glad this is a contiguous scene. I think it's a very strong choice that it does not. It is very focused on everything we are with for these, like, 28 minutes is the characters directly related to it, and I think it's better to leave Neo and Trinity off, having done their own thing. And I haven't felt that idea of, like, the time jumps in it. I kind of get what you're saying. But yeah, I don't know. It works for me. I find it to be, like, a very effective boots on the ground cyberpunk action sequence. I like the mechs they're in. I like some of the mechanics of the war. I just think it does a very immersive job putting you in the middle of this fantastical action sequence and making it feel horrific. There's that little moment where, like, the kid, and yes, I will totally acknowledge the critique that I am having to call all these characters by not their real names. And
his name is just the kid. I think that is what the character is referred to as.
Oh yeah,
like,
it is.
He literally does not have a name.
Yep, that is correct. I'm looking at it right now. That's fine. That is kind of what he is. But, like, when he's in the dock waiting to run out and load bullets, and you get that brief glimpse where the gate opens and someone has to go out and do it, and then you're seeing it all through the kid's POV as it's, like, shit, this is real and this is fucking crazy out there. There's stuff like that works very well for me. I think all of the stuff of the Sentinels just pouring out of this hole in the top of the dock, and they do these giant swarms and they make shapes, and when they come for Mifune and they just cut the shit out of him, you get the feeling of that. There's a lot of stuff like that I think is very good. And I generally like the actors, and I think they sell it, particularly the actor who plays Mifune, whose name I need to find here because I think it's Nathaniel Lees. I think he fucking got the assignment, and that dude is having so much fun on that green screen. He's in because part of the mech is clearly like a physical thing, and then it's extended with CGI, and he's in the thing on his green screen just going to fucking town like he's actually doing this, like he believes it 100%. And when you watch him, I imagine there's more footage of him just firing the guns than they originally planned on, because he is so fun to watch, going rah, rah, die, stuff like that I do find very entertaining.
Yeah, because there is, again, I think a lot of those individual moments, and specifically it's the stuff with the kid and Mifune that I think near the end of the fight that works really well. But there is a... And I find this both charming, and I also think I can see... It is not surprising to me that some people, hate the sequence of this movie, because this is the part of the movie that people really hate, right? This is the thing that I feel I always hear about, that people just, they just don't want any of the machines in Zion, they just want Matrix stuff, right? Is that your read as well, Jonathan?
It is my read, and I think it's wrong, because I think it's really, really important to have the stuff in Zion. I understand people not liking this scene, and I understand changes you could make to improve it, but I do think it is incredibly essential for this last movie to have a big stretch of just boots on the ground human beings trying their best against literally impossible odds. It is thematically really important that there is no actual way for them to win this fight, because again, this movie is about fighting against something inevitable, which is death. It's a very thematically motivated action sequence. I can buy a lot of criticisms. The criticism I will not buy is that this is detached somehow from the themes or ideas of the movie. This is an action sequence that is very invested in the major ideas of the film it is in.
Yes, and I 100% agree with that. And that's the thing that separates it from the action in The Matrix Reloaded. I think it's it's a very polar opposite sequence to me from the freeway chase scene. I think the freeway chase scene is much better technically constructed as a holistic sequence. Whereas I feel there are lots of kind of gaps, I guess I would say, in the way the battle scene is put together in this movie. But I don't really care about the freeway chase scene, because the most that scene gives me is, oh, it's cool. Look, Morpheus with the katana, that's very cool. But it doesn't give me oh, there's meaning, there's motivation, there's care and emotion in this. Whereas even if I think it gets a little bit muted by the fact that the characters I don't think are as built up as they should be, that is still all there in this fight, and that's the stuff that it does very well. The thing that's I'm sort of mixed on, because I both kind of love it and also kind of roll my eyes at it, is the aesthetic of this whole sequence is I did not realize where we got the aesthetic for every first-person and third-person shooter from 2006 to 2009 from, but it is this movie. It is this scene, and I kind of love there is a crazy sci-fi B, super expensive. So I don't want to say B movie in that it looks cheap, but what it's going for is this very sci-fi B movie, a video game movie for a video game that doesn't actually exist. That's what the scene looks like to me, and there's something that, again, I both find that very charming, and also, the entire time I was looking at this as, is this a trailer for Killzone 2? It is crazy to me how much, Gears of War, Killzone, Resistance Fall of Man, and, all the knockoffs of those games is, it is just exactly this. The fucking rocket launcher they have is the most video game prop looking two big barrels next to each other that looks like it's an unused weapon model from fucking Quake. It is a rocket launcher that looks like it's supposed to extend as a rectangle on the center of the bottom of your view from a first person perspective. It's the most video game shit I have ever seen in a movie. And I both kind of love that, and I kind of hate it at the same time. And I think and I think that's part of the thing that puts a lot of people off. Is it you have a lot of shots of people just jerking fucking analog sticks around, basically. It's stuff like that. It's it is that stuff I find supremely goofy on like an aesthetic level. Some of it I think is like some of what the movie is doing. Some of it is more what was influenced by this movie is making it hard for me not to just see fucking Killzone 3 or something while I'm watching that whole scene.
Well, I totally get what you mean, because I have that with the Star Wars prequels sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, it is... The Star Wars prequels were also, like, so influential to generations of video games. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring has whole stretches where, like, oh, this is every fucking fantasy game from Skyrim to what have you, even The Witcher in places, like, is so inspired by this aesthetic that I definitely get that. But yes, I do think there's more intentionality for it in The Matrix because we know the Wachowskis actually know their video game shit.
Yeah.
And the Wachowskis are probably the only Hollywood directors actually qualified to direct a video game movie, and they don't have to because they've made movies that influenced so many fucking video games.
Yeah.
And The Matrix is kind of a video game movie in that sense. It is engaging with video game-esque ideas, and the construction of this action sequence probably is gamic in a lot of ways, you know? It does kind of feel like a level with bosses that, like, oh, there's the big thing in the middle of the map that we have to go send a rocket in through the big hole, and then it'll blow up and we've won the match. You know?
Yeah, it is. Here's the big spinning drill robot with the big red weak point in the top that you shoot a rocket launcher in. Is an enemy I have fought in 1,000 video games before and after this movie came out. Like, it's hard to even like describe how much this sequence looks like. It is like it could be the most expensive FMV from like a video game I somehow never knew existed. Like, it's like fucking watching Wii Commander or some shit. Like, it is like the costumes, and it is some of the gun, like the big laser guns they have and the rocket launches they have look like when you watch the live action Halo things they've made, and you have to see a normal human being hold a Halo gun. And you're like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. Why would you ever make a gun like this? It looks great in the video game. A real human has to like hold this prop. It just looks so fucking dumb.
Yeah. But I also kind of love it. I love that, like, there is a lot of CGI in this sequence, obviously. They didn't build real sentinels and send them through a hole in the wall, but there is so much tactility to it. I love how much is physical here. I love that, like, this scene really feels built on a principle of it's only CGI if it has to be CGI.
Yeah.
And a lot of, like, again, it's not that Mifune is in, like, a complete blue screen rig. There's actual stuff he's touching and manipulating, and then it's extended around him. But it's such a, like, physical scene. It's such a... Because I think a lot of what you're talking about, I react to, and I'm so invigorated by it, because the world building is so tactile and thought through, and it feels, like, functional. And even if it's functional in a certain video game logic, which I completely agree, I think you're right on that, I do think there is, like, a holistic quality to it that, again, I just miss in movies. I miss it, Sean.
Yes. And I'll agree with you that I think, like, from a filmmaking perspective, in the sense of, like, the effects work, like, it is a huge step up to me to the really CGI-heavy stuff in Reloaded. This will extend to the Smith scene at the end, where I think there's a little bit of, like, it looks a bit plasticky, but generally I think they got better in this movie at, like, knowing the limits a bit more and, like, constraining it a bit more and finding that sort of point of where you shift from practical sets and props and things like that into things that are CGI enhanced and then things that are fully CG. I think it's much more elegant here, and it's the kind of thing that, you know, when you talk about, like, the modern Marvel Studio, like, CG schmaltz thing, of where, like, it's not just Marvel, like, it's fucking any big movie that's, you know, it's the one, like, shining thing about Dune that I do really appreciate is how much better it deals with its effects stuff, because most modern Hollywood big spectacle movies, it's just the most CG blah stuff you can ever look at, and here there's so much thought and intentionality and care put into how you deal with the special effects stuff to have a very tangible, real, physical feeling world, even when so much of what is happening on screen has to, by necessity, be very digital. And that stuff I do find very invigorating. I think where I have some of the issues, though, is, like, I think there is a bit of an aesthetic disconnect to me, and that's maybe part of where, like, I kind of love and hate the video game thing of, like, there's a part of me watching that sequence that felt like I was watching a different movie, because you don't have any of our major characters in it, and because, you know, all of, like, the big Matrixy stuff is happening over there with Neo and Trinity, there is like an unescapable like this is not exactly the Matrix that I'm watching. There is a certain, again, like sci-fi B movie, like sci-fi channel B movie thing to it that is kind of unescapable to me, even with how lavish the production is and how well made it is in a very technical ways. There's an aesthetic quality to it that I find somewhat alienating from the rest of the movie.
I totally understand that, and it's not something that affects me the same way, but I do understand what you're saying. The other side of the sequence, though, that I just find so fucking cool is Niobe piloting the ship through the. They keep saying it's like this is the mechanical line. No one can do the mechanical line, because one of my favorite tropes in any kind of fiction is the fucking super ace pilot who can pilot anything. Goddammit, and people will be around the pilot going, "You can't pilot this that way. That's impossible." And the pilot's like, "Watch me do it." I love that trope. I love it in Star Wars. I love it in fucking Gundam. Does it sometimes? Give me my ace pilot. Give me my Han Solo. Give me in this movie Niobe doing crazy things, which they also show. They like do cool stuff with the ship, like doing crazy turns and whatnot, and like it feels like they really know how those even if they don't give us all the lore, it feels like the people working on the movie know exactly how those ships work, because the mechanics of it physically feel very real. Like one of my favorite ones is where she does this drop where they turn off all of those magnetic fields around the ship other than the two on the very bottom, so she can just skate along the bottom. There's a lot of stuff like that. It's just really cool. I love that side of it.
Yeah, I agree that side of it is fucking awesome. And that's where like, and that's almost part of like the aesthetic disconnect is like that stuff is so Matrixy to me, and then you cut to the cutscene from Killzone 2, and you're like, what is happening here? But yes, there are some. There is one in particular. There is a very goofy shot where they cut into, they have all the guys on the turrets, and they're using the same kind of big joysticky looking, like they're at like a arcade playing a Mech Warrior game or something. And there's one shot where it feels like there's just not quite enough sound effects, and you can too distinctly hear the very clicky clacky button thing of the actual physical prop that Link is a shot with Link, and he's doing it. And it's a very brief moment, but there was one moment where it's like they really needed to put like a heavier sound effect pass over this shot, because you could hear the physical prop too much on the microphone, because it's like you can just hear it, and it's another one of those like, this is a video game movie, isn't it? Oh god, what's happening?
Yes. All right. I think that we've done a good job breaking down this entire action sequence. I like the series of kind of falling action scenes that happen after this, where it's everyone sort of picking up the pieces in Zion and figuring out what they're going to do next. And I think it's kind of funny that this came out a month before Return of the King, because there's a very Return of the King-esque feeling from like the last debate scene, is what is in the book, but in the movie, where it's all the people in Minas Tirith being like, well, we beat this wave of Sauron soldiers, but now what do we do? And then they all turn their eyes, to Frodo in the east. And it feels like that's what they're doing with Neo. Obviously, The Lord of the Rings as a book existed long before The Matrix, but I do think it definitely echoes some of what Return of the King, how it stages its action there too, I think.
Yes, yeah, there's definitely like a very similar, like, you don't have like the huge battle right at the end. You have the huge battle at the middle, and then, I mean, you have a fight scene at the end of the Matrix Revolutions, but not like the battle. And there's a much more personal resolution that they sort of go back to our main boys, either our Frodo or our Neo.
Yes. And so, Sean, should we go back to Neo and talk about their journey into Machine City, which, God, you want to talk about cool world building?
Yeah.
I fucking adore what they do with Machine City and both sides of it. I think them going over the fields is really cool. I think all of the big machines that come out to fight them, I love how we don't even get a sense of their full scale or functionality. They are it's very H.R. Geiger. They are so alien to us. And then there's the other side of the world, which is Neo's vision of this orange glowing light of this machine world he sees, its essence. Movies don't get to imagine like this much anymore. It's so fucking cool, Sean.
Yeah, it's a really incredible sequence where, again, you have this very powerful symbolic tension between those of they are going to heaven, right? They're going to go meet God, this like creator figure that has made the world of the Matrix and like has like created the world that they live in, this like hellscape, and you have these like just like almost kind of like just disgusting looking big machine things that are over the human plants that then start shooting other machines at them. And yeah, there's this very like discomforting, like alien quality to everything you're seeing. Also, within the back of your mind, this is then forefronted when they go above the clouds, but you know the entire time, like, oh, this is like the actual surface of the Earth, which we have never seen in these movies. We have always been underground somewhere. This is like we are on the surface. This is what our planet looks like. And for the machines, like, or from like the human perspective, it is this just fucking utter hell on Earth. It is the most awful thing you could like imagine the world looking like. But then from Neo's perspective, and then by extension, presumably the way the machines see it, is this luminescent city of lights that he is able to see this whole other side of it and guide Trinity through, following the power lines and all that stuff. And that juxtaposition of like heaven and hell represented in the same thing is very, I think, potent to me.
Very potent, and they do something with the effects and the composition and everything here that really shines on the 4K disc for this movie is incredible. But it looks like concept art a lot of the time, and I mean that in the best way. It looks like if you were to get the big Matrix like coffee table art book and open it up, it would be like big shining illustrations like this. And I love when movies do that. I think Lord of the Rings does that sometimes. Obviously anything with a matte painting is going to do that. I think that's one of the things I like about James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, is a lot of his stuff out in space looks like the concept art. And like it doesn't look like this super processed, let's make it all look super tangible and physical. It's just kind of nightmarish and like artistic and painterly. And I think that's true also when they go over the clouds. The way they illustrate, there's this one shot when they break through the clouds that looks like a matte painting to me, and it's fucking gorgeous.
Yeah, it has this like almost kind of dreamlike aesthetic to it, or like, you know, the machines, maybe nightmare would be the better word to use, but yeah, where it is kind of unreal, in a way that is very powerful and evocative for sure.
Yeah, just this cyberpunk nightmare, and then there is this luminescence beneath it. It's very, I think Alien, we mentioned earlier, it's definitely got a lot of H.R. Geiger in it.
Yeah.
And Alien, and definitely actually some of the stuff Ridley Scott has done in Prometheus and Alien Covenant remind me of some of the images in Matrix Revolutions in particular. I love Neo manipulating all the machines, assaulting them. He's got his hand outstretched and he's just exploding them everywhere. The scale of it is really cool. And then, of course, there is the moment where he tells Trinity to fly up and they break through the clouds, and we see, and Trinity is the first human in eons to have seen the sky and the sun. And it is, I think, one of the most beautiful moments of the trilogy, of the Wachowskis' career. When they break through, like I said, it looks like a matte painting, and I love that we build that moment entirely around Trinity because she's the only one there who can appreciate it. And it's both her seeing and then a lot of focus just on Carrie-Anne Moss's face as that face is lit in a way we've never seen a face in the Matrix lit, which is natural sunlight on it, you know?
Yeah.
What a fucking moment.
Yeah, and it being contrasted with the fact that Neo can't see that, right? And it's later you have the moment where Neo tells her, like, it's lights, like, I wish you could see what I see. And you know, they are both together and apart in this sequence, right? There's like this weird kind of like existential distance between the two of them, because here Neo is basically a machine entity, right? He's like a program. He is a part of that world, and she is a part of the human world still. And what he sees in the machine city is what she sees in the sky and the sun, and the, like, you know, the clouds are white and fluffy above the held line of the like shadowed up like sort of surface world that we've always seen on the Matrix. That contrast, I think, is so evocative.
Yeah. And then we get her death scene. It's always struck me that there are a couple of frames, it's not even a full second, there are a couple of frames in the crash where you see the steel beams go through her. I don't know if you noticed that while watching, Sean. It's very fast. But then the ship crashes. You have Trinity knows she is dying before the audience or Neo is let in on it, which I think is very interesting. And overall, I just think this is a beautifully written scene that Carrie-Anne Moss in particular goes to town on. I think it's really powerful. I remember seeing this in the theater, and as how old would we have been? 11 at this point? Like, I had not seen a lot of meaningful character deaths on screen. And this one is, as an adult, I actually find it to be a very beautiful scene in a lot of ways. But as a kid, and it is also there in the scene, it's very cold. It's very, there's no absolution to it. She's just fucking dead, and it's brutal. That's still pretty rare to see a death scene like this, certainly in a mass piece of pop media.
Yeah, definitely. It is. Yeah, it's a very effective scene, as you say, for I think that contrast of like the warmth of what she is saying and like of what she felt in her relationship with Neo, with the just like the coldness and the harshness, right? That again, there is this existential divide that you also get of Neo can't see her, and he can't see like what has happened to her. He's blind to that like human part because he's gone over to this other world. And there's something very like somber and melancholy, I think, about that they're like their relationship and their love is like kind of already over before that happens, right? That there's like they are already a part of two different worlds. And this is like this last little moment calling back to the end of Matrix Reloaded for them to for her to, as she says, she gets like one more chance to say goodbye, to say the things that she wanted to say to him.
Well, I love that because he says, you can't die, you can't. He keeps saying that. And she says, yes, I can. You brought me back once, but not this time. And then she goes into this, and I think it's really powerful because she reframes the resurrection from the end of Reloaded not as useless because she dies like 24 hours later in the timeline of the movie, but as really meaningful because those couple extra hours meant everything. It allowed her to play this very important purpose in life because she says, like, this was my role in this story and it's over, basically. And then also she had the time to say this thing. She realized she had this regret of not saying what mattered. And so she takes these moments and she makes what little life she has left worth as much as she can possibly make it. And that's the difference, and that's the meaning of it. And that is, like, I honestly think there's a lot of, like, affinity here with Persona 3 and how it views death. And I think that it is this inevitable thing, but there is also, like, beauty in making what you make of that time, and that a lot of meaning comes from knowing it is finite.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's something very unique, I think, about how this sequence is framed and used and in relationship to the rest of the movie. That this, as you say, this notion that because Trinity hasn't like done a lot in this movie, really, like because not a lot happens in this movie, right? It's such a like streamlined, quick, focused, like there's not a lot of stages in the plot of what they're doing. But her just getting this one last time to sort of like reassess what was important to her, right? Because the first time she died, she said, "I'm sorry." And that's not how she wants to leave. She wants to leave like embracing the life that she lived, not regretting this final choice that she made.
And it's also important because this is the third important like encounter Neo has that informs his decision at the end of the movie. Because you have the scene with Ramachandra and the family and Sati, you have the scene with the Oracle, and then this is really important because, you know, when I say this movie kind of has this division between love and karma, this is what I mean, is when they talk about love in the beginning of the movie, and Ramachandra has his lines about, like, you know, love is a word. And he's saying, you know, love is a word, and what it means is it says, I'm trying to find the exact quote here. I can't find it, but here it is. What matters is the connection the word implies. I see that you are in love. Can you tell me what you would give to hold on to that connection? Anything. Then perhaps the reason you're here is not so different from the reason I'm here. And so they very much define love as this thing that, like, you hold on to and you want to survive. But then there is this other side of it, which is karma, and in the movie they define it as this sort of like what I am here to do. And of course, if you extend karma beyond the way it's been like westernized and commercialized of like put good in, get good out, the fucking like juicy juice version of karma, there's the actual like version, which is that there is like we shape the world we're in, you know, of like the actions we do actively shape the world we see and experience and perceive. And that there is also, you know, meaning and purpose in that. And I think there's this tension here of Neo, he has to lose Trinity to be able to do what he's able to do, but he also has to see her die with the dignity she has, and her framing this moment as her kind of reclaiming some power of herself in that death. for him, I think, to be able to do what he does at the end of the movie, which is to allow himself to die.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah. I like the way you're sort of framing it as of the encounters he has, because it's a very similar structure that the Matrix Reloaded did as well. I think it's like the thing I liked about it is there's this very intentional step by step kind of journey. Again, it's part of the very kind of religious or spiritual elements of the Matrix is his sort of journey of discovery in learning spiritually what he has to do, and part of that is here accepting mortality as a thing that can't be escaped, and not a thing to be. It's not a thing that you can live in utter fear of. It's something that you need to know is a part of you and the life that you live.
Yeah. So then you get Neo walking out of the ship and through that big corridor, which we see in his world of light. One little touch in the effects and everything here that I love is there's all these machines that are almost like little squirrels or something come and they kind of scurry around Neo. And I don't know if you got this feeling, Sean, but I definitely got this feeling that they're scared of him. That they're all these machines that are this is the guy. This is the guy who just broke through our defenses. This is the one who was supposed to do the thing that he didn't do, and now he's here. And they're all kind of trying to suss him out, and I think they're a little afraid of him, and I love that. I think that's a really cool little piece of characterization they do on the machines.
Yes, because also, of course, he could just blow them all up with his crazy mind powers, so
yes.
They should be afraid of him.
Yes. And then he meets again, in the credits, in the production materials, it is called the Deus Ex Machina. We can also just call it God, which is Deus.
Because it's also, it should be clear that, the thing isn't a Deus Ex Machina in a dramatic sense. It is a Deus Ex Machina in the sense of that term means in Latin God out of the machine. So it is a God made of machines. But
that's why I love it. It's a fucking great pun, because they make the term very literal. It's God, but he's a machine. Yeah.
Yes.
And I love that the way it's represented is it's actually not one machine that comes down. It's a bunch of machines that form this face, so it has something to talk to Neo. But clearly it's a hive mind thing almost. If you're to break down the machine culture, it obviously represents God in the narrative. I also like that its human face looks like an angry baby. I think that is a weird, interesting choice. But,
yeah, if I'm going to be honest, I kind of feel like it being a big human face that talks to him feels a bit like a cop-out. I wish it was more weird and abstract and unknowable. Yeah. The way that it is presented initially, and then it makes the big human face. I'm this feels like a studio note where someone said, you can't just... You need to have something talk to Neo here. You can't just have it all be implied visually and through Neo's, side of it. But I feel like that's would have been the most, honest way to present this scene is not have him just, have a literal dialogue with a big machine face.
I probably agree. I think you could have done something even where, what he sees in his vision of light is totally different than what he sees in the physical world there. We need... What is the machine equivalent of the burning bush, Sean? Of, the thing that talks through God. Or God talks through.
I like the initial machine that comes down that's just this fucked up... It's just covered in spikes, and it's got this big one red burning eye looking thing... And it's there, and it's just making weird, crazy sci-fi noises. And then you get Babyface. I'm I liked weird, unknowable machine god a lot more than Babyface.
Yeah. I gotta say, I think this is the most badass Keanu Reeves might be in the entire trilogy, is just staring down the face of God and not wavering. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It is, yes. It's a very cool guy thing to do.
Cool guy thing to do, and he's very... I love the quote. So he says, I only ask to say what I've come here to say. After that, do what you want. I won't try to stop you. And so they say, okay, speak. And Neo says, the program Smith has grown beyond your control. Soon he will spread through this city as he spread through the Matrix. You cannot stop him, but I can. The machine gets very mad at him and says, we don't need you. We need nothing. And they swarm around him, and he says, if that's true, then I've made a mistake, and you should kill me now. And then God pouts for a second and says, what do you want? And Neo says, peace. And that's the whole thing. It's not a big conversation. And when he says peace, you cut to Zion, and you have all the swarm of the Sentinels is coming in, and I love they get out their little fucking satellite dishes.
Yes.
I love the satellite dishes.
Gotta tune in and listen in. God's talking with that fucking meat bag.
Yeah. I mean, they are very far below the surface, so, those are some strong satellites they've got. And then they all lay down their arms. And I do like in that moment that it's Morpheus is the one who gets it. He also lays down his gun, and he goes out and looks and says, and someone says Neo, and he says, he fights for us. Which, that's why Lawrence Fishburne is in this movie. You need to have Lawrence Fishburne say he fights for us. That's fucking great. Yeah. And, kind of like the fight sequence earlier, or the big battle sequence earlier, this movie also sharpens down to a point where it really, before Neo goes into that last battle, it sharpens the entire arc of this thing, kind of like Frodo getting the ring into Mordor, down to, like, Neo's last stand. And so you are just so into all of it. And then they make a chair for Neo, they jack him into the Matrix, and then a song starts that on the soundtrack is called Neo Damarung. Yep. Which is one of my favorite score. One thing we should say, one of the big stylistic changes Revolutions makes from the first two is it does not use incidental music. It only uses score. The score is written by Don Davis, and then, I forget who is there's another kind of composer who helps with a lot of the music, and I forget their name. It's basically a band that worked on it.
Juno Reactor.
Juno Reactor, yeah. But it is all score. It's all original score. So this movie has a more traditional score, and there's a lot of stuff Don Davis does where he takes motifs from the previous movies and builds them into much more fulsome musical themes. He does that with Trinity and Neo's sort of love theme, which you get in her death. But I think it all culminates in Neo Damarung, which is one of the best titles for a piece of movie music ever. And it is over the most fucking hype climax to a movie, Sean. How fucking great is this fight?
I love that the Wachowskis in 2003 made a bunch of old, quite, like, crusty white film dudes sit down and have to watch some fucking Dragon Ball Z. I'm very happy that that's the thing that happened. It is like, we've talked, obviously there's lots and lots of anime influence throughout the Matrix movies. This is the moment where it just turns into an anime. Like, it's just completely, this is just an anime fight. The Neo Dameron song, it was a hit on my, like, Halo 2 fucking, like, playlist in 2004 online. Like, I'm gonna listen to fucking like that fucking big piano part that backs the whole song is so fucking sick. It's amazing. It's utterly ridiculous. Watching it again for the first time since like probably 2005 or 2006, I am just blown away that this is a thing that they got fucking away with. I cannot believe that Warner Brothers in 2003 let people make this scene, because it is amazing, and it is just the antithesis of like anything in Hollywood. Like, it's just so fucking absurd.
I'm amazed on that level, but I'm also amazed it's so good. Like, this is as close as I can imagine Hollywood ever getting to doing a Dragon Ball thing right. Like, if you had the Wachowskis go make a fucking Dragon Ball movie, the only way you could improve on it is if they had Neo do the Kamehameha. I mean, yes, there's a couple of moments where the effects feel a little dated, but another thing they do that's really intentional in this scene is it's more physical than I think I remembered. Like, everything they could possibly do with people, they do. Like, there's that whole part where they are in the level of the apartment building that sort of looks like a dojo. That's all just real. Yep. That's all wires, and it is like things being blown up on set, and it's very tangible, because you can, especially in 4K, you can tell when it's CGI. And even a lot of the stuff where they're up in the sky, it's very clearly them on wires on green screen. Like, it is as physical as they could possibly make it. And then I think that, like, the art direction, the colors, the way it is it's the greenest part of the whole Matrix, is this fucking green ass sky. It is pouring rain. It's pouring rain through the whole sequence. That had to be the most miserable fucking thing to shoot for Keanu and Hugo Weaving. And rain is one of those things that looks really good in 4K. So this sequence is a fucking 4K demo reel. And then you have that music. It is just so, I don't know. I hate to say this because it's lazy, but I don't know what else to say. This scene is like infinitely fucking hype. And it just like is such a great climax to the movie. And the movie's going to end on a big philosophical note, but it wouldn't be The Matrix if it didn't also have a big fucking crazy Dragon Ball fight where they like punch so hard they collect all the water from the air and then blow it back out as a fucking like bomb, which is the most anime thing I've ever seen in a live action movie.
Yeah, this is another place where I think like contrasting it with the equivalent scene, the Burly Brawl from Reloaded, I think like can help me kind of highlight part of my problems with that scene is one, like, that scene doesn't have any good like build up to it. It just sort of happens. Whereas here, I mean, obviously you have the whole movie's building up to it is the climactic scene. So it's like going so fucking extra for this fight scene is so earned because you have all the build up to it. But also I think the choice to have it be raining during the scene is really key to selling the effects because like at this point you don't have things like subsurface scattering and more advanced like textures and lighting techniques for fake humans in movies. So when they're lit in the daylight, they look so plasticky.
That's very true. Yeah.
And here, by having the like sheen of the water on the fake digital skin when they have to do digital doubles, like it avoids some of that problem because you don't have like the dry skin is so hard for you to render and represent with the digital techniques they had at the time. Whereas this obfuscates a lot of it. It's like some of the same stuff that like why the effects in the original Jurassic Park hold up so well. One is because a lot more of those effects are practical than I think people ever like give it credit for. But also when they do CG, they are very deliberate in how they light it and put it in the dark and the rain, and it's lit from like very specific singular directions because you don't have this flat kind of like overall lit scene. And here it just feels like I don't know how much of this would have been possible for them to have learned from the Burley Brawl because of like how short the productions were next to each other. But like this just seems like a much more conceptualized scene around the idea of it has to be over the top. We're having long sequences with full body replacements completely in CGI. And then also, you know, the other thing they're doing is that the things they're having the full CD body replacements do are so ridiculous because they're just flying like Superman or Goku and Vegeta, and they're crashing into the air and causing massive shockwaves. And it's a little bit less of the Burley Brawl thing where they are doing things that you couldn't do with normal people, or you'd have to just like buy, like just say, fuck it, we're just doing the stunt double thing and it's going to look very fake, you know, give a shit. But it's not so ridiculous that you can't conceptualize a very similar scene just done with normal people. You can't possibly do half the shit they do in this without anything other than full CG body replacements. The stuff that they do physical, as you say, they do totally physical and it's great. And then when they go digital, they say, let's just go fucking crazy with it. And that to me is much better conceptualized around like the technology and the things they could execute at the time to make this fight scene work so well.
I think you're totally right. I think that's a great analysis. And yeah, that like when they do the CGI stuff, they do it for these big flexes that you couldn't do. One of my favorite ones is there's that moment where it's where Hugo Weaving winds up cratering Neo into the ground, where the final scene happens. But over, you see like Hugo Weaving's CGI body do this big, like, it's a DBZ bulk up. Like he literally does. The top of his body like bulks up in a way you could never do in live action. It's such a like Dragon Ball Z thing to do. And then he flies, and it's very obviously CGI today, but I don't mind it because what it's doing has to be like it looks fine because that's what it's supposed to be conveying, right?
Yeah, and it's so crazy, right? It's so unreal on the face of it that it be looking unrealistic isn't a problem versus like doing the big spin kick on the pole in the Burley Brawl like is not so like it is obviously sped up and all this stuff, like it's not a thing that a human being really could actually just do, but it's not so ridiculous that you can't just imagine what a normal human being would look like if they were doing it. I don't know what a fucking normal human being looks like when they're flying with the power of magic cyber bullshit, so expressing it in this very fake artificialized but expressive animation and stuff, them going so over the top with it totally works.
Absolutely. And when they make it physical, like I think that part where they are in the little like apartment dojo is one of the best things in all of the Matrix. There's two moments there that just fucking kill me. There's the one where Neo, and this is all done with wires. It looks so good, where Neo kicks himself off the wall and shatters the wall behind him, flying towards Smith. Like Keanu looks so good in that shot. It is so tangible. It is such a cool piece of, like, it's up there with, like, what's in Crouching Tiger. Like, it is just phenomenal modern wire work.
Yeah.
And then there is the whole fight they do in silhouette in front of the window where it's, like, raining and lightning outside in the back, and it's slow-mo with the big choral music. That might be, like, the most fucking hype thing in the whole sequence. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely some of the best use of slow-mo in any of these fight scenes, because there it's like slow-mo. It's less of, it's not the, like, spin shot or whatever from the first movie and stuff like that. And yeah, there's some, and there is some very good stunt work where you get to see like there's some like real fucking hits in there. That gives it a very Hong Kong feel, because most like Hollywood action scenes, and I appreciate that there's a good reason why you don't want to fucking kick someone in the face, but there's an artificiality to it because there's a reluctance to like take actual hits. And again, I appreciate that, but in the Hong Kong action movies, Donnie Yen is kicking a motherfucker in the fucking nose, right? That's just happening, and that guy's gonna get a couple extra $100 or whatever at the end of the day, but you're gonna get punched in the face, right? Like you're gonna get fucking thrown around, like you're gonna get some real hits in. And there is some shots in here where you see, and I think most of them are probably stunt doubles, because a lot of it is in that silhouetted scene where you can't see the people quite as well. But you see some, like, that's some fucking contact. Like, you can see the, like, arm, like, bending and moving as it's receiving the kick in a really physical way. And that kind of, the way it's grounded there in that scene, I think then when it contrasts with the more extreme stuff, it makes the fight more exciting because it has that variety to it.
Oh, totally. And, man, it's so good. I feel like, what's the name of the choreographer in these? It's Yu Win Ping, something like that? It's the guy who did...
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm forgetting his name, and if I got it wrong, and I hope that wasn't too offensive, and I do apologize. But, great work on all of these. I think the size of his credit gets bigger in every movie. I don't know if you noticed that, Sean. Like, in the credits of this one, it's during the credits scroll at the end, but, like, he gets, like, they leave his name on screen through the scroll until his, like, name is completely alone in a scroll on black, and worth it, because fucking tremendous work in all three of these movies.
And particularly with this scene, like, there's not a lot of stuff like it, there's
No.
It's really kind of the terms of live action filmmaking. It is like really kind of blazing its own path.
Sean, the stuff with water. I mean, good God!
Yeah.
Like, one, to just see that in CGI now would be impressive, but like in 2003 is wild. And I think the way they conceptualize how like all the water and glass breaks, and like showing like how ultra like extra human this fight is, that it's having these like physical impacts on the world and like changing the laws of physics in weird ways. Like, it's so cool. It's so anime as fuck. And we know no one's ever done it better, because the closest anyone's done to this is Zack Snyder with Man of Steel at the end, and it's not as good as this. And I think there's a lot of impressive filmmaking there, but like it's basically doing what the Wachowskis kind of cracked here. And Hollywood did make a fucking Dragon Ball movie after this. They didn't get it right.
Yeah. I will say that I do really wish that the Wachowskis had gone so far as to just straight up have Neo shoot a Kamehameha.
That would have been pretty cool.
Like, whatever it is, like however you frame it or whatever, but having him shoot some sort of like energy projectile, and just straight up have like a beam clash or some shit. Maybe that's too much. Maybe that would have, they could, like, Hollywood just wouldn't let it happen. But I just imagined it while I was watching that fight, and I envisioned the scene in my head. I'm like, it would make it better if there was a giant blue energy beam shooting from his hands that was like, that all the water was like vaporizing off of and shit. Would have been fucking rad.
Yeah, this is really good. But, all right, let's come back down to Earth as the fight does. We're in the crater, and, I think one unshareable reading would be to say, like, this whole fight is just there to, like, give the audience what they want before you give them the harder ending. And I don't think that's true. I think it is actually very important that Neo fights before giving up, because, well, he's not giving up. He's doing something more intentional than that. But, like, the movie does lampshade this. This is part of the idea, and it's also part of the idea in Zion. It's like there's an importance to the fight, even if there's inevitability to it, because it's kind of like rejecting it's the Nietzschean question, right, about, like, life, that if you know you're going to die, then isn't everything absurd and you should just give up? And of course that actually means life is more meaningful, because you have to give it something to live. And that's sort of what we come to in this movie. You have one of Smith's biggest speeches in the entire trilogy is his, "Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? That whole thing he gives. And I fucking love that. I want to read a little bit of it here because I think the words are important. Why keep fighting? Do you believe you're fighting for something? For more than your survival? Can you tell me what it is? Do you even know? Is it freedom or truth? Perhaps peace? Could it be love? Illusions, Mr. Anderson, vagaries of perception, temporary constructs of a feeble human intellect trying desperately to justify an existence that is without meaning or purpose, and all of them as artificial as the Matrix itself, although only a human mind could invent something as insipid as love. You must be able to see it, Mr. Anderson. You must know it by now. You can't win. It's pointless to keep fighting. Why do you persist? Because I choose to. I think that's a very fun piece of writing that is also very pointed in what it's saying, that is sold in large part because Hugo Weaving is so fucking good.
Yeah, because here it's Smith has become a symbol of like nihilism, effectively, right? It's like
that's
what
the Nietzschean thing I'm talking about.
Yes, and he has an earlier line where he says, "It was your life that taught me the purpose of all life. The purpose of life is to end," right? And that's where you're getting this sense of Smith, by being killed effectively at the end of the first Matrix, he is freed from like his sort of like delusions, and that's where his fall happens, and he is given like this insight into mortality, and I think this like fear of death, right? And I like this idea of him, like, he's having this very like adolescent temper tantrum, basically, is what Smith is doing. As they high school English teacher, like you run into a lot of this of like people encountering nihilistic ideas, and like it's a very adolescent mindset of like, oh, everybody dies, life is meaningless, there's no purpose, and being wrapped up in that way of thinking, and having that be like this ideological endpoint that, oh, because there is no inherent meaning to anything, because everything ends and everything is finite, that's like that's it, and that's like the answer to some sort of question. And you get that attitude a lot with young people, and it's where Smith is at. And the problem with that is that is not an end point of ideology. That is like the beginning point of ideology, right? It's not that because everything ends and there is no inherent meaning that then means that there is nothing that can be of value and therefore everything is pointless. It's there is no inherent meaning, everything is finite, therefore what is meaningful and valuable is what you have decided for yourself, and what you have gone on, what you choose to be powerful and valuable is that, right? And so that is the choice that the simple choice that Neo is faced with here, is just, as you say, the struggle is is valuable in and of itself. Like the fight is valuable in and of itself. He has chosen to find meaning in struggling against Smith, and in finding meaning and value in his relationship and his connection to Trinity. And even if it means that ultimately he has to let go, ultimately Neo has to die, that doesn't mean that all those things that came before were meaningless. They had meaning because Neo chose that they had meaning. And it's why Smith is powerless at the end, is because his philosophy is powerless. His philosophy is a nothing, an end point. It is as pointless as debating whether or not there is such a thing as free will, because if there is or there isn't, it doesn't make a difference. In the same way as debating whether or not there's any inherent meaning, if your conclusion is that there is no inherent meaning, that conclusion has no power in and of itself. It is a like philosophical nothing, and can be just cast aside and moved on to other things that you do feel are important.
And it's how the movie ultimately frames the question of choice that it's so interested in throughout these two sequels, is Neo's line there. It's the choice is ultimately the choice to live knowing all of these things. Mm-hmm. And those are the choices that make meaning out of things. This is why the word believe comes up so much in the movie. One moment we skipped over is when the kid fires the gate open at the end of the big action sequence in Zion. He says, "Neo, I believe." It's a cheesy little moment, but I think it's also a very meaningful moment, because what he's saying there is not Neo is the predestined hero who's going to save us all. He's saying, I have this faith in this person, and that doing these things matters, even though I've seen all of this fucking death and destruction, right?
Yeah.
And characters keep saying things like that, and it's through all of these people believing together and choosing to persist that they do ultimately make a new world. Because the system wants you to give up, right? The system, as we've talked about it a lot in The Matrix, which has become very complicated at this point in the structure of the story, but it is still there, and it's the thing that wants you to. It's what Smith is saying. Why do you persist? Why do you have any desire to fight back against me, knowing that what I represent will win out in the end? And it's because I fucking choose to, and because if we don't, just nothing's going to happen. And so that choice to keep fighting is the thing that matters. And they, of course, make it very expressionistic in that the next moment after "because I choose to" is the big bullet time punch where Neo's fist goes through individual droplets of rain before fucking up CGI Smith's face real good and then, flinging him into the wall. It's very good stuff.
Yes. I do like the ridiculous fat hot dog raindrops that exist in the Matrix. Yes. This is that's not what rain looks like, but it's very fun. It allows for the cool, all the water to forming around his hand, even if it is fucking ridiculous. That it's here's this 6-inch long fat raindrop coming out of the sky.
Yeah. Because Neo basically beats Smith here. He gets him, pummels him into that one, and he's down for a minute. And I think there's this really interesting moment where Neo has basically won, and he's got his two fists out, and he looks up and sees the sea of Smiths. And of course, in that moment that, this is kind of futile, because if you put one down, there's an infinite number, right? Neo cannot actually win this fight, and he knows that. And then Smith does come back, screaming about how this is his world. And I think you're right in saying Hugo Weaving is kind of being a petulant child here. He's being an adolescent who has discovered Nietzscheism and is very mad about the world. And then you have Neo on the ground, Smith there saying, "I've seen it. This is it. This is the end. You were laying there, right there, like that, and I stand here. I'm supposed to say something. I say, everything that has a beginning has an end, Neo." Which, of course, is his mistake, because that's the Oracle's word. Yeah. It brings Neo back
But him saying the word Neo is so just because
he doesn't ever say,
he's only ever called him Mr. Anderson. Another reason why Neo probably should have very quickly figured out when Agent Smith was in the real world, because nobody has ever called him Mr. Anderson but Agent Smith. But the moment that word comes out of Hugo Weaving's mouth is the moment you're like, oh, you fucking did it. And he's like, what did I just say? It's like, you fucked up, man.
And then Keanu just stands there, and his last words in the trilogy are, "You were right, Smith. You were always right. It was inevitable." And then our last shot of Keanu in the trilogy, well, we see his dead body later, I guess, but of living Neo is he is getting assimilated. He leans back and closes his eyes as the metal comes over him, kind of making peace with it. Again, there's not a lot of franchises where you can really think about what are the actual final moments of a character, but they have to do it here. And then he is Smith. Smith is Neo. Is in the body, and then the machines surge power in and kill that body. And he assumes a crucifixion position. The light literally comes through his body as a cross and then consumes him. And this is just one of those theoretically very rich sequences, because Neo's body becomes the site, the physical site of this meeting between human and machine, the place where the Smith program becomes localized, but in this human body that can die, which is Neo's ultimate power. Because if you can kill it in there, then you can destroy the program. And I think that is kind of the ultimate purpose of the movie, and the arc it's saying is Neo does have all these cool powers that allow him to get there, but the ultimate thing he does is the thing any human could do, which is to die.
Yeah, and to choose to live and to die with meaning and purpose that you have made for yourself, right? That has not been ascribed for you. That he has broken free of the system of constructed purpose, and he has struggled to find a purpose for himself. And here he has finally found it, right? Even in death, that has value because it's something he's found for himself. And then, thus freeing everybody else, right? So, now Morpheus is freed from, his sort of own prison of the purpose of the prophecy of the one. He is now free of that to now go make babies with Niobe from Enter the Matrix or whatever they're going to do. That Neo's death then saves everybody and gives them this world without this overriding system controlling them, whether that system is the machines explicitly in the Matrix or the prophecy the machines have created of the one to guide and control their development.
Yeah. And this is also where you can't just say that Reloaded is a waste of space in the trilogy, because Reloaded is setting up all of this. You have to go through the arc of the One, and we talked about this a lot at length in the last episode, that the whole scene with the architect and the idea of doing the entire arc of the One as it was prophesied is really important, because the Matrix Revolutions only becomes a revolution because now we're breaking out of that system, and we get to the point where Neo has died for a purpose that was not ascribed to him, right?
Yeah, and one that he chose for himself.
Yeah. And I think it's also, you talk about why is this a good Christ allegory, and a lot of what happens in movies is not a good Christ allegory. And part of it is I think it understands one of the fundamental things that is like meaningful in the Christ story is that his humanity, like he is God in man, right? Mm-hmm. And man can die, and it is the death that is the important thing, because that is the thing we wind up sharing with God. God comes down to earth and shares the experience of death with man.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, the thing that makes this like an interesting use of Christ like mythology and like Judeo-Christian mythology is that it is like critically engaged with it. Like the thorny and complex nature of the machines and the machine God as this representation of God that is like very confrontational. It is fused with like systems of power and control that exist in a more like political and economic sense in our world as well, and sort of like collapsing those into one sort of singular symbol here, and then having, the product of that system returning and trying to defy it in some way as being, also your Jesus metaphor. Like there's like it is critically engaging with and poking at and exploring this like very rich and broad symbolic idea of Jesus that has obviously been explored in a million different angles. Like this is not far from the first time that Jesus has been like depicted as a rebellious type figure that is pushing against God's form of control and saving man from God in some way. But like that is, I think, like a very interesting way to take it, and it's a very critically engaged way to take it that is a lot more than Superman's superficially kind of like Jesus, huh? Which is about what you get,
Well, like Man of Steel's idea of doing a Christ allegory is he sits in front of a stained glass window in one scene, and then he kind of stretches out into a cross position at moments, and then in Batman v Superman he gets stabbed with a spear. Because the most important parts of Christian ideology, Sean, are the little pieces of iconography. I mean, Snyder's
there was, of course, that one time where he was picking up a kryptonite rock with like two kryptonite rocks with both his hands, and they put a little hole in both the middle of both of his hands, and he looked at his palms and was like, oh, the stigmata. That was the cut scene. I don't know if it was in the director's cut of Batman v Superman or not.
No, it is. It's a big part of that. No, I mean, I think this movie is engaged with, obviously the iconography is important and works into it in a little bit, but like the iconography comes out of the ideas. It's not iconography kind of layered on the movie on top like frosting, Yeah,
it's like the iconography is there to signal to the audience that this is like one of the modes that we are like building our meaning out of, right? Like it is signaling to you this like this is like a code that you can use to approach the movie and understand. One way you can understand a lot of the meaning in it. But the meaning is not trapped by the iconography. It's like the iconography is a doorway to that critical discussion.
Yeah, and we don't just have to beat up on Zack Snyder. We talked about this with like Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Yes.
Particularly the TV version appropriates a lot of like Christian imagery as window dressing, and you cannot really do, I think, a very engaged reading of like why is Lilith on the cross and it's stupid.
Adam in the Black Moon and the Gate of Goof or whatever, the Chamber of Goof.
Spear of Longinus. And,
yes.
Yeah. No, this is very good, and I think one of my favorite parts of this too is that Neo's dead, and he gets carried off by the machines, but it's such a fascinating image because it's not a desecration. It's not them like flinging his body off. It's done. And again, you kind of have to like read into it a little bit because it's no one saying anything, but what I read from like the body language of the machines is that it's very respectful. They're very gentle with the body. Yeah. It's not a desecration. And when the body is being like carted off through the city, you see then the big light emanating out of it, the spirit in the body. It's fucking beautiful, man.
Yeah. And then you get like the ending of the movie that I've always really loved of the like painterly sunset or like sunrise,
Yeah.
I guess it is, over the Matrix. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two. Let's quickly. I want to do two. So first off, there is also the stuff in Zion, and it's brief, but I like that it's the kid who kind of runs through Zion declaring Neo did it, and it's kind of like he's Saint Peter. He's like the first disciple going out and like starting the Church of Neo.
Yeah,
You know?
I do think that like he's obviously in the scope of the movie, this is how you need to do it, but there's something funny about like they don't have a lot of information about what happened, and it's like it's very easy for the machines could have just like turned it on and said, yeah, fuck it, let's just kill him anyways. It's just like, Neo did it! The war is over, oh fuck, the machines are back.
Well, the thing is, they think they're machines. I don't think they have the concept necessarily of being deceitful that same way. Like, it's a kind of a binary switch, right? Of like, we said we were going to do peace. Okay. Especially like when I think you see the architect in the next scene.
Yes.
He's not happy about it, but he's going to do it because that's how he views the world, right?
I do really love that line by the architect where I forget exactly like how the Oracle sets it up, but where he turns and says it's like basically like he's not lying. He's just like, what do you think I am, a human?
Yeah. Well, I have that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. But then you also have Morpheus's final moment where he's with Niobe and he says, I imagined this moment for so long. Is this real? I love that is Lawrence Fishburne's last line is in The Matrix is this real? Yeah. And then he looks up at the sky kind of thinking about his friends who he knows are dead. And on one level, I said my thing about I could see a version of this where Morpheus dies and reloaded as a better ending. I do like that Morpheus is the one who lives and has to go figure out what life is after all this. I think that's interesting,
Yeah. I do wish that he had like a bigger role to play in this movie. Again, I think if you could have found some way to have him more directly involved in the big battle scene, I think it would have worked well. But yes, it is. I think it's very meaningful that he has to like carry on the lessons that Neo learned by living a life free from the purpose of prophecy and instead building his own purpose and meaning through love and the connection he has with star of hit video game Into the Matrix, Niobe.
Yes. All right, so then we have the final scene where you have the four programs together. You have Sati and the Architect and the Oracle and Seraph. And you have the Architect and the Oracle together, like basically sniping at each other, which is very funny. I like that they're arguing like an old married couple almost. And the line you were thinking of, Sean, specifically is that the Oracle says, and the ones that won out, will they be freed?
Right.
And the Architect looks at her with this withering look and says, what do you think I am? Human?
Yeah.
I love that. Because that's why I trust this ending, is that the Architect and the kind of like machine mind we've seen, I think, at the heart of the Matrix, I don't think would have the sense of like, we're going to be duplicitous to Neo. It's just not in their programming.
Yeah. That it's like, it doesn't compute for him, right? Like it's like he can't think outside of the equations, as the Oracle puts it, and so it's just like, well, 1 + 2 = truce, and that's what we're at.
Yeah, and so they're going to have a truce. They're going to. I also like that. Like the movie doesn't have a 20-minute ending. I'm okay with certain 20-minute endings, like Return of the King, but like, I didn't need a scene where like we saw a bunch of people getting out of the pods and like seeing the world or what that. I like that it's just a suggestion of people will be made aware of this, and if they want freedom, they will get it. And the world is going to change, and it's kind of important that we don't see what's on the other side of this change, because this is an actual revolution that has happened. It is the kind of thing we can't actually imagine in human history, because we don't have many good examples of successful like actual societal level revolutions. And so you kind of have to imagine it. And then it ends with the sunrise and Sati talking to Neo, or the Oracle, about Neo. And I do also love this recognition that Neo has become this messiah to two worlds. Mm-hmm. He's the hero for the machines also, because Neo is, and it's the god in the body of the man and all of that, but Neo is a program to a certain degree because of his construction, but he's both. And you have the line about, will we ever see him again? And the Oracle says, I suspect so, someday. And then Seraph asks her, did you always know? No, I didn't, but I believed. And then we get that, as you say, Sean, extremely painterly sunset that is definitely a good HDR shot for your TV.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And that's the end. And people have made fun of this ending relentlessly for 2 decades now, Sean, but it sounds like you would like to defend it, so go.
I mean, it's just a great ending. Like, I don't even know what there is to defend. Like, it's just like, it's very poetic. Like, one thing, because I read a couple of reviews at the time because I was just curious because I couldn't remember some of the specifics. I was very surprised to see people call this movie confusing because I don't know what is confusing about it, because it's like extremely straightforward. Like, it's almost like I almost wish it was more confusing than it was. Like, it's a very slick 2-hour movie. It's got like a very simple plot. There's like, I don't think it's a perfect movie or whatever, but confusing is not a complaint I would level at it. Like, I think it's pretty clear Neo is a Christ-like figure. He dies at the end. Like, his death like triggers a truce between the machines and the humans. And then what happens beyond that truce is something that you have to imagine for yourself, because endings can, should, and often are like ambiguous to a certain extent, because there is always something beyond the edge of the ending, right? There aren't actually happily ever afters. Most stories don't end that way. There's something to imagine and think about for yourself and consider about, like, what is the world after this? What is the world that has to coexist between humans and machines, which, as you say, is a story that I'm not actually that interested in like being told, and I don't imagine that that's really what The Matrix 4 is going to be about, because I don't think that there's like series that end up trying to do those kinds of stories and those kinds of sequels. Like Dune is actually a good example of this. Eventually, like, it just doesn't go well. So leaving that open for your own imagination to fill in is not weird or confusing. It's like a very normal way for a movie to end.
Yeah, it would be like criticizing Return of the Jedi because we see the Ewok dance, but we don't see like the new government installed. Like, I don't fucking care about those questions. Like, it's also kind of why I prefer the original ending of Return of the Jedi, just focusing on the characters that we knew celebrating together. It's the locus of what we care about. But I think the other side of the criticism of this ending has always been like, oh, this is cheesy and sentimental and blah, blah, blah. And I think people completely misread like this movie's use of the word believe. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight it, because I think a lot of people see the word believe in something like this and they think of it in like the blind faith, like the Oracle saying, I knew it would all end for the best. That's not what she's saying there. She's saying that, like, I believed that this was possible if we all worked for it, and we did, and enough other people believed that we manifested this into the world, which is also kind of tied to the actual idea of karma. Not that I'm a scholar on that or anything, but that's just my sort of basic understanding of it being more complex than, again, just put good in, get good out. That's what the word believe is like indicating in this movie over and over again. And I think the beauty of that ending is saying that if enough people do believe in something like this and work towards it, there is that brighter tomorrow. Like, it is a very optimistic ending in that sense, but I don't think it's naive or stupid or cheesy.
Yeah, because I think what the Matrix movies have done is that they have moved the word believe from the realm of blind faith and blind prophecy into the realm of, like, this is a belief in, like, the meaning of what I'm doing that gives purpose to what I'm doing. And it's that kind of belief. It is a, like, faith in what you have chosen for yourself to be valuable, not faith in something external to yourself that defines it, right? Like, her belief in Neo is belief in, like, the path that he led, in the life that he led, in the conclusion that he came to, which was throwing off these external things that put meaning and purpose onto you and discovering it for yourself. Like, it's a somewhat sentimental ending, but it's also like a dark as fuck ending, because also Neo is dead, Trinity is dead. Like, it is. It's like it is. I find it a kind of a bittersweet ending, because it is these immortal angelic beings looking at, like, what has happened and noted, and, like, the humans that we have followed along the way are dead, and we are left with these, like, inhuman entities, like, looking back at the story that we've just experienced. Like, I find something very melancholy about that structure.
I mean, it almost reminds me of, like, some, like, epic Greek poetry and epics where, like, you start and end the story with the gods up on Mount Olympus talking about the humans, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of got that feeling to it. it doesn't surprise me that people said this movie was confusing. I think it's completely fucking wrong. I don't think it's a confusing movie. But it does ask you to use your brain at least a little bit. And, like, it doesn't, when the machines send the surge into Neo's body to kill him, you don't cut to outside and have Deus Ex Machina go, quick, my machines, send a surge of energy into Neo's body to kill him and purge the rogue program. And I guarantee you, if this movie were made today, it would fucking have that line in it. I mean, 2003, we're 10 years away from the start of the fucking YouTube genre, the ending of Halloween Kills explained.
Yeah.
What explained? He stabbed people. What are you talking about? Like, I have a slide about this in my my fucking PowerPoint this week for the class I'm teaching, talking about different approaches to textual interpretation, and I'm basically showing the fucking, like, ending explained videos as, like, this is bad. And I just did a little experiment of, like, can I do this with every movie? And so my joke version was, I said Cruella ending explained, and I found several Cruella ending explained videos. Sean, it hasn't been that long since Matrix Revolutions, and we live in a world where there's a genre of videos for explaining the ending of Cruella.
Yeah. Or
people are fucking stupid.
Like, let me look up like Godzilla v Kong ending explained. Well, you see Godzilla and King Kong fought each other, and then they were friends at the end. Explained. I mean, I'm sure it's there. I mean, I can guarantee any movie made in the past 5 years. 1, 2,
3, 4, 5. Yeah, I've seen 6, 7 right off the top on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I can almost guarantee that, other than maybe, like, small art house films that actually probably have very ambiguous endings that would be interesting to watch a video of someone talking about their own interpretation, other than small movies that most people haven't watched, any movie made in the past 5 to 8 years probably has dozens of ending explained videos on there with, some fucking thumbnail of a dude, looking, super confused, and then a big, ending explained in massive letters across the back of it. It's awful. It's the death of, like, all critical thinking in the world, and it is, one of the main things that is ushering the end of our civilization as we understand it.
I mean, look, like, I don't think The Matrix are really confusing movies. I don't think they're subtle movies. They're very talky movies that I think are very open with their ideas. But what they are is they're fairly Socratic. Like, they are, very much bringing up ideas and then asking you to fill things in. Like, all that stuff I said about the word believe, it doesn't end with her saying, but I believed. And then Sati turning to her and saying, but what meaning of believe are you using here, Oracle? Do you mean it in this sense or this sense? And she goes, well, Sati, let's let the credits roll, and then I'll come back in a mid-credit scene and explain it to you while fucking Mr. Mixotsplick comes in as our, like, surprise character at the end of the movie. Like, it does... It's not, a fucking, like, French art house movie level of, like, interpret for yourself. But there is a trust in the audience in the Matrix movies to, like, take ideas and synthesize them that you couldn't just feel being rejected in the criticism of the time. And, movies shifted in a certain direction after this.
Yeah. I typed ending explained into YouTube, and I'm just scrolling down and, like, having my my faith in humanity being killed with every, like, adjustment of the mouse wheel.
I know.
It's hilarious that, like, most of them are horror movies, which is, like, every horror movie ends the exact same way. It ends with, we defeated the monster. No, we didn't. And then it smashes the credits. That's every horror movie ever made. There's your ending fucking explained. They tried to do a scary jump scare at the end. Explained your ending for you. Yeah.
I know. It's, we're getting very sad here, but not about The Matrix. The Matrix is great. And I think...
Yeah.
Sean, you and I have some points of disagreement on the sequels, but I think in large part, I will try to summarize. I think our conclusions are probably Matrix 1 is a perfect fucking movie.
Yes.
Matrix 2 and 3 are not perfect movies, but I am deeply glad they exist, and, like, they are more interesting than the vast majority of Hollywood sequels ever.
Yeah. I think that, like, I definitely don't have as much sort of, I guess, like, love for the sequels as you do. Like, and I don't feel like I don't feel the need to rewatch them a lot in the way that, like, I'm very excited to rewatch the Star Wars prequels. And I don't know if I'm going to have, like, that same response to these movies.
Sure.
But they are really good, and they're very interesting sequels, and they have a lot on their minds, and they're, like, so... They have a lot of rough edges in a way that the first Matrix doesn't, but that doesn't make them bad. It in many ways, it makes them really interesting movies to talk about and engage with, even if, like, I do have issues with some of like the ways they use action in The Matrix Reloaded, and the way that like the big middle action scene in Revolutions I think is kind of rough. In some ways, it's they are engaged with big interesting ideas and expressing those big interesting ideas through like weird, like eccentric kind of genre taste and style. And a lot of that genre taste and style, like anime stuff, is stuff that I also really like. So it all works for me. The one thing I do think is a missed opportunity is they do need to re-release The Matrix Revolutions and change that ending line to Sadi asking, "Will you think we'll ever see Neo again?" And then the Oracle looking up and saying, "I think we will on December 22nd, 2021 in The Matrix Resurrections."
It's just cut to credits like with a much happier song.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like Neo will return in The Matrix Resurrections.
I mean, I don't know if you want to do any speculation here, but I am so interested in The Matrix Resurrections, even though The Matrix Revolutions does not need a sequel. It is a really closed ending. But if anything, I kind of find that fascinating, because I think if it were anyone else, if they had gotten a new filmmaker to come do more Matrix, I would be fucking crying that it was happening. Mm-hmm. But like, I think it being Lana Wachowski, I think her coming in very clearly with a lot of intentionality. The movie looks very different. It's got a whole different crew of creative leads all over it. Mostly new cast. It's Neo and Trinity up at the top, but it is not everybody else. And again, from the trailer and what I've seen, I'm not even convinced it's in the same continuity.
Yeah.
I'm interested because, The Matrix trilogy, it's on my shelf. It's there right now. It's fine. It's not perfect, but it's great the way it is. And, the new one could suck. It could be fucking fascinating. I don't like there's all upside, and to me there's very little downside. The downside is I might not enjoy it. The upside is this could be one of the most fascinating sequels ever made.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for it. Because it does, because I believe that like Lana Wachowski will have the right approach, right? Which is the like making it connected to these movies in a more sort of philosophical way than in a like literal canonical way. Like I desperately do not want some explanation that's very technical about like Neo secretly his consciousness was saved but like I don't want any of that. Like I don't care. What I want is Lana Wachowski reapproaching The Matrix as a franchise, in a series, in a story, in its themes and ideas, and reassessing it and approaching those themes and ideas from like everything that she's learned and how she's changed, and then like how the world has changed and how that reflects on everything that The Matrix talks about. That's a movie that sounds very interesting, and I believe that that's what we'll get with The Matrix Resurrections, and not the like sort of lore fest thing that I would normally be very worried about with doing a new Matrix movie. If it was anybody else, you would get the like Wikipedia synopsis read to you by the movie kind of thing. And I really do not think that's what we're going to get. So I'm very excited for it.
I agree with all of that. I'm very fascinated in what it could and will be. And, what is The Matrix in 2021? Because we live in a cinematic world that was partially shaped by The Matrix, but is also very different than this was in 2003. And we live in a world politically and socially that is very different than it was in 2003. So there are a lot of questions for that movie to ask and answer. We're not done with The Matrix quite yet. I think sometime in December we will do another episode talking about the Animatrix and some of the games and all of that.
I've got my copies right here still. Into the Matrix and Path Neo. Whenever I do a podcast, I make sure they're nearby because they give me, faith and hope in humanity, because these are 2 video games.
They are 2 video games. We will talk about them at some point next week on the show, Sean.
Yes.
We will be doing a different kind of...
I just remembered what we're doing next week on the podcast. I had totally forgotten about it over the course of this podcast, what we're going to do next week. Go ahead and explain, Jonathan, to the audience, what are we doing for the podcast next week?
So, this November, specifically November 16th, which is next Tuesday, the podcast will come out Tuesday instead of Monday, is the 20th anniversary of the release of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the movie by Christopher Columbus. 20 years that is a big time. We're also going to hit the 20-year anniversary of Fellowship of the Ring, but we did a big retrospective on that, and I don't think we need to do one. Yeah. And you can go listen to that. Maybe I'll re-release it or something around that time, but you can go listen to that if you want. We've never really done any kind of Harry Potter podcast on here for a multitude of reasons, mostly involving you fucking hating it. But we are going to rewatch the original Harry Potter movie, and we are going to put that out on the 20th anniversary. It is, I think, going to be interesting. I wrote Sean a very long text pitching this because I didn't want him to reject it out of hand.
Yeah.
Not that you ever do that with my ideas. You're nice about it. But I just was like, because, okay, there's the one side, which is, I think, for Sean, I want to laugh and be amused by Sean having to watch this movie and then talk about it. And I told you, I said in my text, I said, and you will get to shit all over it as much as you want, basically. And you will. But I am also interested in it for me revisiting it because I have not gone back to Harry Potter in a long time because primarily of all the J.K. Rowling bullshit. And I think it will be an interesting chance to talk about nostalgia, how the world has changed, revisit this movie that was tremendously important to me as a kid, and this 20-year anniversary that just, this is one of those movie anniversaries because that was the most hyped I was ever for a movie in my life or ever will be. And I think it'll be very interesting to revisit. So that is my pitch for next week's podcast, and you have graciously agreed to it.
Yep, it's it's gonna be. I have no idea what to expect. I think we're getting pretty close to also Gundam Build Divers. It's time to start talking about isekai because it is what Harry Potter is. It's just gonna be weird. And I haven't like particularly that first movie, which I've never liked. I enjoy some of the other movies fine. That first movie I've never liked. I haven't watched it in a very long time, and I have absolutely no idea what the fuck watching it is going to be like in 2021. Now that I know that also the ultimate narrative vision behind it is also by an awful human being, which is I have not gone back to any Harry Potter stuff since that revelation either. So I don't know how that'll change my impression also.
And for those of you waiting for Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, that will be 2 weeks from now. So the rest of November will be Harry Potter, then Iron-Blooded Orphans. We might have to take a week off for Thanksgiving after that. We'll see. But those will be the next 2 weeks. I'm excited for both. I think it'll be interesting. We made it through... Sean, we made it through at least 400 podcasts with no Harry Potter. I think you can count that as a win.
I was hoping that we would go forever for all podcasts without a Harry Potter, but if we're going to do it, thus doing the one movie on the 20th anniversary, fine.